If your boyfriend is the best you can do, Sophia, then your standards have fallen a long way. The words echoed through the ballroom. Conversation stopped. Laughter faded. Dozens of heads turned toward the source of the voice, and in the center of the grand ballroom, under sparkling crystal chandeliers and surrounded by some of the most influential business leaders in Chicago, Ethan Carter felt every eye lock onto him. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, have you ever been judged because of your job, your income, or where you came from? And what did you do about it? Now let's get into today's story. The annual Bennett Technologies Anniversary Gala was the biggest corporate event of the year. Executives, investors, department heads, media representatives, and industry leaders filled the massive ballroom of the prestigious Lexington Grand Hotel. The room glowed with luxury. Golden chandeliers hung from the ceiling. Waiters moved between guests carrying silver trays. A live orchestra played softly near the stage. Everyone was dressed for success. Everyone except Ethan, at least according to some of the people in the room. Ethan adjusted the collar of his black suit and looked around. The suit was nice. It wasn't designer. It wasn't custom-tailored. But it was clean, professional, and purchased with money he had earned himself. Sophia squeezed his hand. "You look handsome." Ethan smiled. "You have to say that." "No." She shook her head. "I really don't." Sophia Bennett looked stunning. Her elegant navy dress perfectly matched the corporate atmosphere surrounding them. Her long chestnut hair rested over one shoulder. Her confident smile attracted attention everywhere she went. Many people in the company knew her. Some admired her, some envied her, and almost everyone assumed she could do better than Ethan, at least financially. Sophia was rapidly climbing the corporate ladder at Bennett Technologies. She was respected, talented, well-connected. Her future looked incredibly bright. Ethan, meanwhile, worked as a warehouse supervisor for a regional distribution company. His salary was comfortable. His career was stable. But compared to the executives surrounding them, he seemed ordinary. Very ordinary. The difference never bothered Sophia. It bothered other people far more. Ethan noticed several executives looking in their direction. A few whispered. Others smiled politely. Some barely acknowledged him at all. He was used to it. This wasn't the first corporate event he had attended with Sophia, and it certainly wasn't the first time people had underestimated him. Thinking too much again, Sophia asked, "Maybe." "Don't." Ethan smiled. Easier said than done. Sophia stepped closer. "You're here because I want you here. Not because of your position. Not because of your salary. Not because of what anyone else thinks." Ethan looked into her green eyes. One of the things he loved most about Sophia was her ability to make complicated things feel simple. She never cared about status. Never cared about titles. Never cared about appearances. She cared about character. And that was becoming increasingly rare. The lights dimmed slightly. The orchestra stopped. The crowd shifted attention toward the stage. The evening's keynote presentation was about to begin. Executives gathered near the front. Investors moved toward reserved seating. The CEO approached the microphone. The room fell silent. The presentation began. For nearly an hour, company achievements filled the giant screens behind the stage. Revenue growth, expansion projects, new partnerships, future initiatives. The audience applauded repeatedly. Sophia watched proudly. She had contributed to several of those projects. Her hard work was helping shape the company's future. Ethan couldn't help feeling proud of her. She deserved every success she achieved. The presentation concluded. Thunderous applause filled the ballroom. Then came the networking portion of the evening. Groups formed quickly. Business cards changed hands. Conversations started everywhere. And that was when trouble arrived. Ryan Hayes entered the room. Tall, confident, expensively dressed, the kind of man who looked like he belonged on the cover of a business magazine. Several executives immediately approached him. Investors greeted him warmly. Managers laughed at his jokes. Ryan enjoyed attention. Actually, he thrived on it. The moment he entered the room, he became the center of gravity. Sophia's expression changed instantly. Ethan noticed. "You okay?" Sophia sighed. "Ryan." Ethan followed her gaze. "Oh, Ryan A's, the ex-boyfriend." Sophia had told Ethan plenty about him. They had dated for nearly 3 years. The relationship ended almost 2 years ago. According to Sophia, Ryan's ego had eventually become impossible to tolerate. Everything revolved around him, his success, his ambitions, his image. When Sophia refused to make her life revolve around him too, the relationship collapsed. Ryan never fully accepted the breakup, and judging from the way he stared at Sophia from across the ballroom, he still hadn't. Their eyes met. Ryan smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who viewed life as a competition and who hated losing. "Maybe we should leave before this gets awkward," Ethan joked. Sophia laughed. "You're assuming it isn't already awkward." Ryan began moving through the crowd, directly toward them. Ethan immediately understood what was happening. Ryan wanted an audience. And judging by the number of executives watching him approach, he was about to get one. The crowd suddenly opened around him. People sensed drama. People always sensed drama. Ryan stopped in front of Sophia. "Well," he smiled. "Look who finally showed up." Sophia remained polite. "Good evening, Ryan." Ryan nodded. Then his eyes shifted toward Ethan. A quick glance. Dismissive. Judgmental. The kind of look that measured a person and immediately decided they weren't worth much. "Ethan." Ryan extended a hand. Ethan shook it. Ryan's grip tightened slightly. A small power move. A childish one. But intentional. "Ethan." Ryan smiled. "I've heard a lot about you. Hopefully good things." Ryan chuckled. "That depends." Several nearby executives laughed softly. Ethan felt tension building. Sophia noticed it too. "Ryan." Her voice sharpened. "Don't." Ryan raised his hands. "What?" "I'm being friendly." Sophia crossed her arms. "You and I have very different definitions of friendly." Ryan ignored her. His attention returned to Ethan. "So?" Ryan said. "What exactly do you do these days?" The question sounded innocent. It wasn't. Ethan knew it. Sophia knew it. Everyone listening knew it. "I'm a warehouse supervisor." Ryan nodded slowly. A warehouse supervisor. His voice carried just enough volume for surrounding groups to hear. "Interesting." Ethan remained calm. "What about it?" Ryan smiled again. The same arrogant smile. The same superior expression. The same need to establish dominance. "Nothing." Ryan shrugged. "I just expected more." The surrounding conversations began fading. People were listening now. Really listening. Sophia stepped forward. "That's enough." Ryan ignored her again. His eyes never left Ethan. "You seem like a nice guy," Ryan said. "Honestly. But I have to ask." He gestured toward Sophia. "How exactly did this happen?" The room grew quieter. Several executives exchanged uncomfortable looks. Others leaned closer, waiting, watching, hoping for drama. Ethan understood that Ryan wasn't asking a question. He was delivering an insult. Sophia's jaw tightened. "Ryan?" But Ryan continued. "You're smart," he told Sophia. "Ambitious. Beautiful. You have an incredible future." Then he looked at Ethan, and The pause felt deliberate, cruel, calculated. A warehouse supervisor. The silence became suffocating. Ryan laughed softly. "If your boyfriend is the best you can do, Sophia, then your standards have fallen a long way." The words landed like a punch. Several people immediately looked away. Others stared directly at Ethan. Nobody spoke. Nobody intervened. Nobody challenged Ryan. Because Ryan was powerful, and powerful people often got away with things that others couldn't. Sophia's face flushed with anger. "What is wrong with you?" Ryan shrugged. "I'm being honest." "No." Sophia snapped. "You're being pathetic." The room remained frozen. Ethan felt dozens of eyes on him. He could feel judgment, pity, embarrassment. Some people looked uncomfortable. Others looked entertained. A few clearly agreed with Ryan, and that hurt more than anything. Ryan shook his head. I just don't understand. He gestured around the ballroom. Look at this room. Successful people, leaders, executives, investors. Then he pointed directly at Ethan. And somehow you picked him. The words cut deep, not because Ethan believed them, but because they exposed a fear he rarely admitted. A fear that maybe one day Sophia would realize she could have someone better. Someone richer, more successful, more impressive, someone like Ryan. Sophia stepped between them. You know what? She said, you're exactly the reason I left. Ryan laughed. And yet here we are. He looked Ethan up and down. Trading down. That did it. Sophia's eyes flashed with fury. But before she could respond, Ethan gently touched her arm. It's okay. No, it isn't. It's okay. Sophia looked at him. The hurt in his eyes broke her heart. Ryan noticed it too, and somehow that seemed to satisfy him. For a brief moment, victory appeared on his face. The crowd slowly began dispersing. The show was over. The entertainment had ended. People returned to their conversations. But Ethan knew they would remember this moment. Tomorrow people would talk about it. Next week people would still remember it. The humiliation wouldn't disappear. Ryan straightened his jacket. Enjoy the evening. Then he walked away. Leaving silence behind him, Sophia turned immediately toward Ethan. I'm so sorry. Why? You shouldn't have had to deal with that. Ethan forced a smile. I've dealt with worse. But that wasn't entirely true. Because what hurt wasn't Ryan's opinion. It was the audience. The way nobody defended him. The way some people seemed to agree. The way success apparently determined a person's worth. For the rest of the evening, Ethan struggled to focus. Conversations blurred together. Music faded into the background. The gala continued. But emotionally, the night was over. Hours later, Ethan and Sophia left the hotel. Cool night air greeted them outside. The city skyline shimmered against the darkness. For several moments neither spoke. Finally Sophia broke the silence. He's wrong, I know. No. She stopped walking. I mean it. He's completely wrong. Ethan looked at her. She stepped closer. I don't care about titles. I don't care about money. I don't care what position you hold. Ethan, I love you. The sincerity in her voice was impossible to doubt. And yet the humiliation remained. Because Ryan had exposed something dangerous, something Ethan had buried for years. The feeling that no matter how hard he worked, society only respected winners. Not effort, not character, not integrity. Winners. The city lights reflected in the distance. Cars moved through the streets below. Life continued. But inside Ethan, something had changed. Something important. Something permanent. For the first time in years, he felt truly angry. Not at Ryan. Not even at the people who laughed. He was angry at himself. Angry that he had accepted being underestimated. Angry that he had settled for safety. Angry that people could look at him and see someone ordinary. Ryan thought he was a nobody. Most people in that ballroom probably agreed. And standing beneath the lights of downtown Chicago, Ethan silently made a decision. One day, somehow, some way, he would prove them wrong. Not with words. Not with arguments. Not with revenge. With success. The kind of success that couldn't be ignored. The kind that forced people to reconsider everything they thought they knew. Neither Ethan nor Sophia realized it yet. But the humiliation they experienced that night would become the beginning of everything. Because sometimes the worst moment of a person's life becomes the moment that changes their future forever. And Ryan Hayes had just made the biggest mistake of his career. The next morning, Ethan Carter woke up before sunrise. He hadn't slept much. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the ballroom, the chandeliers, the executives, the smirks. Ryan Hayes standing in the center of the crowd like a king delivering judgment. And worst of all, the silence. Not a single person had defended him. Not one. The digital clock beside the bed showed 5:30, 2 in the morning. Sophia was still asleep. Soft morning light filtered through the apartment window. For a moment, Ethan simply stared at the ceiling. He wanted to move on. Forget the gala. Forget Ryan. Forget everything that happened. But he couldn't. The humiliation replayed again and again. If your boyfriend is the best you can do, Sophia, then your standards have fallen a long way. The words felt like a splinter lodged inside his mind. Painful. Impossible to ignore. Ethan quietly climbed out of bed and walked into the kitchen. The apartment was small but comfortable. Nothing luxurious. Nothing impressive. But it was theirs. Every piece of furniture had been purchased through hard work. Every bill had been paid on time. Every achievement had been earned. Yet somehow in Ryan's world, none of that mattered. A warehouse supervisor. That was all Ryan saw. A title. A salary bracket. A number. Nothing more. Ethan poured himself a cup of coffee and sat near the window overlooking the city. The streets below were nearly empty. Most people were still sleeping. The world felt peaceful. His mind did not. He pulled out his phone. Without fully realizing why, he opened Bennett Technologies' corporate website. The company had been featured prominently during the gala. Photos from the event were already being uploaded. Executives smiled for cameras. Investors posed with company leadership. The future looked bright, at least publicly. Ethan studied the faces appearing on the screen. One face appeared repeatedly. Ryan Hayes, Vice President of Strategic Operations, future executive leadership candidate, rising corporate star. The company clearly viewed him as important. Very important. Ethan leaned back. Something about that bothered him. Not because Ryan was successful. Success itself wasn't the issue. The issue was arrogance. People who genuinely achieved great things rarely needed to remind everyone. Ryan seemed desperate to remind everyone. Constantly. That thought stayed with Ethan. Sophia eventually entered the kitchen wearing an oversized sweatshirt. Her hair was slightly messy. Her expression immediately softened when she saw him. You didn't sleep. Ethan smiled weakly. That obvious. Very. Sophia sat beside him. For several moments neither spoke. Finally she sighed. Still thinking about last night? Maybe. Ethan. I'm fine. No, you're not. He stared into his coffee. Sophia reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Forget Ryan. I'm trying. Them try harder. That earned a small laugh. The first genuine laugh since the gala. Sophia smiled. There he is. Ethan shook his head. You know what bothers me most? What? It wasn't what he said. Sophia frowned. What do you mean? It was how everyone reacted. Was she remained silent? Because she understood. The crowd hadn't defended him. Many of them had simply watched. Some had even seemed entertained. That hurt. Sophia looked away. I noticed that too. Exactly. Ethan sighed. Maybe Ryan was wrong about me. Sophia immediately interrupted. He was. But maybe everyone else wasn't. Sophia's expression hardened. Don't do that. Do what? Start doubting yourself because some arrogant executive wanted attention. Ethan didn't answer. Because the truth was complicated. Ryan hadn't created his insecurities. He had exposed them. That was different. Very different. After breakfast, Sophia left for work. Ethan left shortly afterward. His warehouse sat nearly 40 minutes outside the city. Rows of delivery trucks lined the parking lot. Workers moved shipments between loading bays. Forklifts buzzed constantly. The environment was familiar, predictable, safe. Normally Ethan enjoyed that. Today it felt different. As he walked through the warehouse, he found himself noticing things he had ignored for years. The same routine, the same responsibilities, the same future. Nothing ever changed. His promotion opportunities were limited. His income growth was limited. His potential seemed limited. The realization unsettled him. For nearly a decade, he had focused on stability. Get a reliable job. Work hard. Pay the bills. Build a good life. Simple, respectable, responsible. But now he wondered something he had never seriously considered before. What if stability had become a cage? The thought lingered throughout the day. By lunchtime, Ethan found himself sitting alone reviewing inventory reports. Normally he would focus entirely on work. Instead, he opened a search window. Bennett Technologies, revenue reports, industry analysis, market performance, corporate leadership. One article caught his attention. The headline surprised him. Bennett Technologies faces growing competitive pressure. Interesting. He clicked. The article discussed shrinking profit margins, delayed expansion plans, operational inefficiencies. Nothing catastrophic, but definitely not the glowing picture presented at the gala. Ethan continued reading. Then another article, and another. A pattern slowly emerged. The company looked strong from the outside, less strong underneath. By the end of lunch, curiosity had replaced frustration. Ethan wasn't thinking about Ryan anymore. He was thinking about the company. Specifically, why someone as arrogant as Ryan seemed so confident despite obvious problems. That evening, Ethan returned home carrying takeout for dinner. Sophia arrived shortly afterward. She looked exhausted. Long day. You have no idea. They sat together on the couch eating dinner. Eventually, Ethan asked a question. How involved is Ryan in company operations? Sophia blinked. Why? Just curious. She studied him. You've been researching. A little? Sophia sighed. Ethan. What? I know that look. What look? The one you get when something starts bothering you. Ethan smiled. Maybe. Sophia set down her fork. Ryan oversees strategic operations, meaning supply chains, vendor contracts, expansion initiatives, large-scale efficiency programs. Ethan raised an eyebrow. That's a lot. Yes, it is. Something about her tone caught his attention. You don't sound impressed. Sophia hesitated. Then she shrugged. Ryan is excellent at presentations. What does that mean? It means he's excellent at presentations. Ethan laughed. Sophia laughed too. Then her smile faded. Some people inside the company believe he's more focused on appearances than results. That was interesting. Very interesting. Do you? Sophia considered carefully. I'm not sure. That answer spoke volumes. Over the next several days, Ethan became increasingly fascinated by Bennett Technologies. Every evening he researched. Annual reports, industry forecasts, financial statements, market analysis. The deeper he looked, the more questions appeared. One division consistently underperformed. Another showed declining efficiency. Several competitors were gaining market share, and yet executive compensation continued increasing. Something didn't add up. One night, nearly a week after the gala, Ethan sat at the dining table, surrounded by documents. Sophia entered the room carrying tea. Still researching? Maybe. She smiled. This has officially become an obsession. Maybe. She handed him a mug. What are you looking for? Ethan back. I'm not sure. That's reassuring. He laughed. Then he pointed toward several reports. Look at this. Sophia studied the numbers. What about it? This division. She nodded. What about it? It's losing money. Yes. So why are they expanding it? Sophia frowned. I don't know. Ethan pointed toward another section. And this division is profitable. Very profitable. So why are they cutting investment? Sophia stared at the report. For several moments she said nothing. Then she looked up. Huh. Exactly. Huh. The numbers didn't make sense. And Ethan hated things that didn't make sense. The following weekend, he spent nearly 12 hours analyzing publicly available information. By Sunday evening, his notebook contained pages of observations. Potential opportunities, inefficiencies, missed revenue streams, operational problems. The more he studied, the more excited he became. Not because he wanted to criticize the company, but because he kept seeing solutions. Simple solutions, practical solutions, profitable solutions. That realization surprised him. He wasn't just identifying problems. He instinctively knew how to fix them. Years of logistics experience had taught him things that executives often overlooked: efficiency, processes, distribution, cost management, practical realities. Suddenly, his warehouse experience didn't feel insignificant anymore. It felt valuable, very valuable. Sophia found him late Sunday night staring at pages of handwritten notes. "You realize most people spend weekends relaxing." Ethan smiled. "Most people aren't me." "No, they definitely aren't." She sat beside him. "What happens if you're right?" "About what?" "These problems." Ethan looked down at the notebook. "I don't know." Then he paused. Actually, that wasn't true. For the first time since the gala, he knew exactly what he wanted. He wanted more. More responsibility, more challenge, more opportunity, more growth. He wanted to stop limiting himself. The realization felt both exciting and terrifying. Sophia seemed to sense it. "What are you thinking?" Ethan looked at her. For several moments he said nothing. Then he finally spoke. "The warehouse isn't enough anymore." The words surprised even him. Once spoken, they couldn't be taken back. Sophia stared at him. Not shocked, not worried, just thoughtful. Because she understood what he was really saying. The gala had changed something. Ryan's insult had ignited something, and that something wasn't anger. It was ambition. Real ambition. The kind Ethan had buried for years beneath routine and responsibility. Sophia smiled softly. "Then maybe it's time to figure out what is." For the first time since the humiliation, Ethan felt something unexpected. Hope. Not the vague kind. Not wishful thinking. Real hope. Because for the first time, he could see a path forward. He didn't know where it would lead. He didn't know how difficult it would be. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He would never allow anyone to define his worth again. And somewhere deep inside, a dangerous thought began taking shape. Maybe the people running companies weren't smarter than him. Maybe they simply thought bigger. If that was true, then perhaps it was finally time for Ethan Carter to start thinking bigger too. The following Monday started like every other Monday in Ethan Carter's life. His alarm rang at 6 in the morning. He showered, got dressed, grabbed coffee, drove through traffic, walked into the warehouse. On the surface, nothing had changed. But internally, everything felt different. For years, Ethan had viewed his job as the destination. Now it felt like a stepping stone. The shift was subtle, yet impossible to ignore. As he walked through the loading bays, he found himself seeing opportunities everywhere: a delayed shipment, an inefficient process, a poorly organized inventory section. Problems that once seemed normal now stood out immediately. His brain automatically began calculating solutions: faster routes, better scheduling, improved workflows, reduced costs. The ideas came naturally, almost too naturally. That realization followed him throughout the day. By lunchtime, Ethan sat alone in the break room with his laptop open. Instead of watching videos like most employees, he continued researching Bennett Technologies. The company had become a puzzle, and Ethan loved solving puzzles. The more information he gathered, the more contradictions he discovered. Publicly, Bennett Technologies projected strength. Privately, the numbers suggested growing weaknesses. Some divisions were thriving. Others were quietly bleeding money. Several strategic decisions seemed completely backwards. Ethan couldn't understand it. Until he began looking deeper. Much deeper. That evening he returned home carrying 3 folders filled with notes. Sophia immediately noticed. "You brought homework." Ethan laughed. "I guess I did. Most people stop studying after college. Most people aren't trying to understand a billion-dollar company." Sophia shook her head. "I created a monster." Ethan spread the folders across the dining table. Charts, reports, industry articles, market analyses. Sophia looked at the growing collection. "You've spent way too much time on this." "Probably. Definitely." But she sat down anyway. because despite her teasing, she was curious too. Ethan opened one folder. Look at this. Sophia leaned forward. What am I looking at? This is Bennett's distribution division. She studied the numbers. It doesn't look terrible. It isn't. Ethan pointed to several figures. But it should be performing much better. Why? Because demand is increasing. Transportation costs are falling. Technology is improving. Sophia nodded slowly. So profits should be rising. They aren't. She frowned. You're right. Ethan smiled. The excitement was growing. For the first time in years, he felt intellectually challenged. Really challenged. The next folder contained another surprise. A manufacturing division that executives considered underperforming. Yet according to Ethan's analysis, the division wasn't the problem. Management was. The operation itself had enormous potential. Someone was simply running it poorly. Sophia reviewed the numbers again. Then again. Finally, she leaned back. How are you seeing this? What do you mean? I work inside the company. Half the executives don't see these things. Ethan shrugged. Maybe they're looking at the wrong numbers. The answer sounded simple, but it stayed with Sophia long after the conversation ended. Because she had noticed something. Ethan wasn't guessing. He wasn't throwing around theories. His conclusions were backed by logic, by evidence, by practical experience, and somehow that made them even more impressive. Over the next 2 weeks, Ethan became obsessed. Not with Ryan, not with revenge, with opportunity. Every evening after work, he sat at the dining table researching businesses, studying operations, analyzing case studies, learning everything he could. The more he learned, the more one fact became clear. Most companies weren't failing because of bad products. They were failing because of bad decisions. And bad decisions created opportunities. Huge opportunities. One Thursday evening, Ethan attended a local business networking event. Normally, he avoided events like that. They felt uncomfortable, artificial, pretentious. But this time was different. He wanted information, knowledge, perspective. The event took place inside a downtown conference center. Small business owners filled the room. Consultants, entrepreneurs, investors, startup founders, people from completely different industries. For the first hour, Ethan mostly listened. He heard stories, successes, failures, lessons learned. Patterns emerged quickly. Many businesses struggled with the same problems: inventory management, distribution, operational efficiency, cost control. The exact areas where Ethan excelled. That realization hit him hard. Maybe his skills were worth more than he thought. Near the end of the evening, he found himself speaking with a manufacturing company owner named Robert Mitchell. The man looked frustrated. Very frustrated. My operation is a disaster. Robert sighed. We're missing deadlines. Costs keep rising. Inventory is a mess. Ethan listened carefully. The problem sounded familiar. Very familiar. Eventually, he asked a few questions. Then a few more. Within minutes, several possible solutions appeared. Simple solutions. Practical solutions. Robert stared at him. How did you figure that out so quickly? Ethan shrugged. I deal with logistics every day. The older man shook his head. Nope. This is different. What do you mean? You see problems differently. The comment lingered in Ethan's mind all night. When he arrived home, Sophia was waiting on the couch. How was the event? Ethan sat beside her. Interesting. That's usually your code word for life. Changing. He laughed. Maybe. Sophia smiled knowingly. What happened? Ethan explained the conversation with Robert. The manufacturing problems, the suggested solutions, the reaction. Everything. When he finished, Sophia remained quiet. Then she asked a simple question. Have you ever considered consulting? Ethan blinked. What? Consulting? No. Why not? He laughed. Because nobody would hire me. Sophia gave him a look. The man literally asked for your advice. That's different. How? I was helping. Sophia crossed her arms. Consultants help. That's the entire business model. Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it. Because she had a point. A very good point. Over the following week, the idea refused to disappear. Consulting. The word followed him everywhere. At work. At home. During commutes. While researching companies. The more he considered it, the more logical it became. Businesses paid enormous amounts of money to solve expensive problems. And Ethan happened to be very good at solving expensive problems. At least operational ones. Still, doubts remained. Lots of doubts. He wasn't an executive. He wasn't famous. He didn't have an MBA. He wasn't wealthy. Who would trust him? The answer arrived unexpectedly. 3 days later, his phone rang during lunch. The caller was Robert Mitchell, the manufacturing owner. Ethan. Good to hear from you. I have a question. Okay. Would you be willing to look at our operation? Would Ethan paused. What do you mean? I mean officially. The older man continued. We discussed your ideas with our leadership team. They liked them. Very much. Ethan nearly dropped the phone. What? Would like you to visit. Review the operation. Tell us what we're doing wrong. For several moments Ethan couldn't speak. His heart raced. The opportunity felt unreal. Robert laughed. I'm guessing that's a yes. Ethan looked around the warehouse. The loading docks. The forklifts. The familiar routines. Then he thought about the future. About possibilities. About potential. Maybe this was the opening he had been searching for. Maybe this was the first step toward something bigger. I'd be interested. Good. Robert sounded pleased. Let's schedule a visit. After hanging up, Ethan sat silently for nearly 5 minutes. The break room buzzed around him. Employees chatted. Machines hummed. Life continued normally. But Ethan's world had just shifted. For the first time, someone was willing to pay for his knowledge. Not his labor. Not his time. His knowledge. That distinction mattered. A lot. That evening he shared the news with Sophia. She immediately jumped from the couch. Are you serious? I think so. Sophia wrapped her arms around him. That's amazing. It's just a meeting. No. It's validation. Ethan smiled. She was right. The money didn't matter. The opportunity did. Someone had recognized value in him. Professional value. Market value. The kind Ryan and people like Ryan had completely overlooked. Later that night, Ethan sat alone at the dining table. The city lights glowed beyond the apartment window. The notebook containing his research lay open before him. Pages filled with observations, ideas, solutions, opportunities. For weeks, he had viewed those notes as a hobby. Now, they looked different. Now, they looked like a roadmap, a path toward a future he had never considered possible. And, as he stared at the pages, another realization slowly formed. Ryan Hayes had called him a nobody. But maybe Ryan had accidentally given him the greatest gift of his life. Because without that humiliation, without that anger, without that challenge, Ethan might never have discovered what he was truly capable of. The thought brought a small smile to his face. The journey was just beginning. He still had no company, no investors, no business, no guarantees. But he finally had something he had been missing for years. Direction. And sometimes direction is far more valuable than certainty. 3 weeks later, Ethan Carter stood in front of a decision that terrified him. A decision that could either change his life forever or destroy everything he had worked for. The manufacturing consultation had gone better than anyone expected. Much better. Ethan had spent 2 full days inside Robert Mitchell's company. He toured the warehouses, observed production lines, reviewed inventory systems, interviewed managers, analyzed shipping schedules. By the end of the visit, he had filled nearly 2 notebooks with observations. What surprised him wasn't the number of problems. It was how obvious many of them were. Inefficient storage layouts, redundant transportation routes, poor inventory forecasting, outdated reporting systems. None of the problems were impossible to solve. Most weren't even complicated. They had simply been ignored for years. When Ethan presented his recommendations, the executive team expected a few minor suggestions. Instead, he delivered a complete operational overhaul. For nearly 2 hours, he walked them through every weakness he had identified, every unnecessary expense, every missed opportunity, every process that could be improved. The room had gone silent, not because they disagreed, because they were shocked. One executive eventually leaned forward. "How much experience do you have doing this?" Ethan hesitated. "Officially." The room laughed. "Not much." That answer somehow impressed them even more. 3 days later, Robert called again. The company planned to implement Ethan's recommendations immediately, and they wanted him available for future consultations. The call changed everything. For the first time in his life, Ethan realized something. His knowledge had value beyond his job, far beyond it. The realization should have excited him. Instead, it scared him, because every new opportunity brought him closer to a question he wasn't ready to answer. What if he actually left the warehouse? That thought followed him everywhere, while supervising shipments, while reviewing schedules, while driving home, while eating dinner, everywhere. The safe path was obvious. Keep the job, continue consulting occasionally, avoid unnecessary risks, maintain stability. But another voice had started growing louder. The voice that had awakened at the gala. The voice Ryan Hayes unknowingly created. The voice that whispered one dangerous question. What if you're capable of more? One evening, Ethan sat alone in the warehouse parking lot long after his shift ended. The sun had disappeared. Most employees had already gone home. Only a few vehicles remained. His eyes drifted toward the massive building. For years, this place had represented security, predictability, comfort. Now it felt different, not bad, just smaller, like a chapter he had already finished reading. His phone buzzed. "Sophia. You still at work?" "Yeah." "Everything okay?" Ethan looked at the warehouse, then sighed. "I don't know." That answer immediately worried her. "What's wrong?" "I think I'm standing at a crossroads." Sophia was quiet. Then she said something surprising. "Come home. We need to talk." An hour later, they sat across from each other at their dining table. The same table where Ethan had spent countless nights studying business reports. The same table where dreams had slowly started becoming plans. Sophia folded her hands. "Say it." Ethan looked up. "What?" "The thing you've been avoiding." He laughed nervously. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do." She leaned forward. "You've been thinking about quitting." The words hung in the air. Heavy. Unavoidable. Ethan looked away, because she was right. Sophia already knew. She had known for weeks, maybe longer. "I've thought about it." "A lot." Ethan nodded. "A lot?" Sophia took a deep breath, then surprised him again. "I have too." Ethan blinked. "What?" "I've been thinking about it too." "You have?" Sophia nodded. "I know you. Probably better than anyone." She smiled softly. "And I know what happens when something captures your attention." Ethan laughed. "That's not always a good thing." "No, but this time it is." The room fell quiet. Sophia reached across the table and took his hand. "Ethan, look at me." He did. "I need you to answer honestly." "Okay." "If you stay at the warehouse for the next 10 years, her voice softened. Will you be happy? The question hit harder than expected, because he already knew the answer. He just didn't want to admit it. After a long silence, he finally spoke. No. Sophia nodded, as if she had expected exactly that response. What scares you more? She asked. Failing? Or never trying? That question stayed in the room. Neither spoke. Neither needed to, because both already knew the answer. Never trying. That was the real fear. Failure would hurt. Failure would be painful, embarrassing, financially difficult, but never trying. That would haunt him forever. Sophia squeezed his hand. Then maybe you already know what you need to do. The next several days were among the most stressful of Ethan's life. He reviewed finances repeatedly. Savings accounts, monthly expenses, emerthly expense funds. Every dollar mattered. Every decision mattered. The numbers weren't comforting. If he quit his job, they would have approximately 11 months of financial runway. Maybe 12 if they were careful. Less if unexpected expenses appeared. The margin for error was small. Very small. Most people would call the plan reckless. Some would call it irresponsible. A few would call it stupid. And honestly, they might be right. That was the terrifying part. One mistake could undo everything. One failed contract. One bad decision. One unexpected setback, and the entire plan could collapse. The pressure felt overwhelming. Yet strangely, excitement grew alongside it. For the first time in years, Ethan felt alive. Not comfortable. Alive. There was a difference. A huge difference. A week later, another call arrived from Robert Mitchell. His company had already implemented several recommendations. The results were astonishing. Shipping delays had fallen dramatically. Inventory accuracy had improved. Operational costs were dropping. The executive team was thrilled. "Would like to hire you." Ethan froze. "For what?" "Long-term consulting." The older man laughed. "You saved us a fortune. We need more of that." After ending the call, Ethan stared silently at the phone. The universe seemed to be sending a message. Again, and again, and again. The opportunity was real, not imaginary, not wishful thinking. Real. That evening, he made his decision. The following morning, Ethan arrived at work earlier than usual. His resignation letter sat inside his briefcase. The envelope felt heavier than it should have. Every step toward the office increased his anxiety. His palms were sweating. His heartbeat accelerated. Several times he almost turned around. Several times he considered postponing the decision. Maybe next month, maybe next year, maybe someday. But deep down he knew someday often meant never. He reached his manager's office. Knocked. A familiar voice answered. "Come in." Ethan entered. His manager looked up and smiled. "Morning, morning." Something in Ethan's expression immediately raised concern. "You okay?" Ethan sat down, then placed the envelope on the desk. The manager stared at it, then at Ethan, then back at the envelope. "New." He sighed. "Tell me that's not what I think it is." Ethan smiled sadly. "I'm afraid it is." Several seconds passed. The manager leaned back. "You're serious?" "Yeah." "What happened?" Ethan thought carefully, then answered honestly. "I found something I need to chase." The older man studied him. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, the manager smiled. A genuine smile. "Good." Ethan blinked. "What?" I said good. The manager laughed. "You've been overqualified for this job for years." That wasn't the response Ethan expected. At all. "You knew." Everyone knew. The manager shook his head. "You solve problems nobody else notices. You think differently. I always wondered how long it would take before you realized it." The conversation lasted another hour. When Ethan finally left the office, he was no longer a warehouse supervisor. For the first time since college, he had no job, no guaranteed income, no safety net beyond savings, no certainty. And yet, as he walked across the parking lot, he felt lighter than he had in years. Terrified. Absolutely terrified. But lighter. That evening, Sophia opened the apartment door and immediately saw his expression. For a moment she simply stared. Then she smiled. "You did it." Ethan nodded. "I did." Sophia rushed forward and wrapped her arms around him. Neither spoke for several seconds. The moment felt too important. Too emotional. Eventually she pulled back. "So," her smile widened. "What now?" Ethan laughed. A nervous laugh. An excited laugh. A terrified laugh. All at once. "No." He looked around their small apartment. At the dining table that had become his temporary office. At the notebooks filled with ideas. At the future waiting beyond the walls. "Now we build something." That night neither slept much. Not because they were worried. Although they were. Not because they were scared. Although they were. They couldn't sleep because everything had suddenly become real. The dream was no longer hypothetical. The risk had been taken. The bridge had been crossed. There was no going back. And somewhere across the city, inside a luxurious penthouse apartment, Ryan Hayes was preparing for another day of corporate success. Completely unaware that the man he called a nobody had just taken the first real step toward changing both of their lives forever. The first morning after quitting his job felt strangely quiet. For nearly 10 years, Ethan Carter's life had followed the same routine. Wake up, drive to work, manage warehouse operations, come home. Repeat. Now the routine was gone, and with it came a strange mixture of freedom and fear. Ethan sat alone at the dining table staring at his laptop. The apartment was silent. No forklifts. No warehouse radios. No delivery schedules. Just possibility. Unlimited possibility. And that was somehow more terrifying than any warehouse problem he had ever faced. Sophia walked into the kitchen carrying 2 mugs of coffee. How's retirement? Ethan laughed. I think retirement is supposed to be relaxing. Good point. She handed him a mug. Then how's unemployment? Less relaxing. That earned a smile. Sophia sat across from him. The dining table had officially become company headquarters. A laptop, several notebooks, stacks of business reports, a whiteboard leaning against the wall. Not exactly a corporate empire. Yet, Ethan looked around. Pretty impressive office. Sophia laughed. The rent is reasonable. Management seems nice. Coffee service could improve. For a few moments they simply enjoyed the calm. Then reality returned. Ethan opened a spreadsheet. Projected expenses, savings, monthly costs, runway calculations. The numbers stared back at him. 11 months, maybe 12. That was how much time he had to build something sustainable. After that, things became dangerous, very dangerous. Sophia noticed his expression. Don't. What? Don't start panicking on day 1. I'm not panicking. You created 4 financial spreadsheets before breakfast. Ethan paused. Fair point. The next few weeks became a blur. Every day started before sunrise. Every day ended long after dark. Ethan wasn't just building a business. He was building credibility. And credibility took time. Potential clients didn't know him. Investors didn't know him. Industry leaders didn't know him. He had to earn trust. One conversation at a time. One meeting at a time. One opportunity at a time. The process was exhausting. Some days felt productive. Others felt hopeless. Several companies rejected his proposals. Others ignored his emails entirely. A few never responded. At all. The setbacks frustrated him. More than he expected. One afternoon, after receiving 3 rejections in a row, Ethan collapsed onto the couch. Sophia arrived home an hour later. She immediately recognized the expression. Bad day. Ethan laughed bitterly. Depends. Compared to what? Compared to being hit by a truck? Sophia sat beside him. That bad? Pretty close. She listened while he described the rejections. The ignored emails. The failed meetings. The growing doubts. When he finished, Sophia remained silent. Then she asked one question. How many companies have you contacted? 32. How many said no? 27. Sophia nodded. And the other 5? They haven't responded yet. A smile slowly appeared on her face. Ethan frowned. What? You realize that's not failure, right? It feels like failure. No. It's called sales. Ethan groaned. I hate sales. Everyone hates sales. She stood up. Keep going. The advice sounded simple. But it worked. The next morning Ethan got back to work. Again. And again. And again. Because success rarely belonged to the most talented person. Often it belonged to the person willing to keep going after everyone else quit. 3 weeks later, the breakthrough finally arrived. The call came shortly after noon. Ethan almost ignored it. Unknown number. Unknown company. Unknown opportunity. But something told him to answer. Hello. A familiar voice responded. Mr. Carter. Speaking. This is Karen Reynolds from Mitchell Manufacturing. Ethan immediately sat up. The company where he had completed his first consultation. Good afternoon. Karen sounded excited. Very excited. I wanted to update you. Okay. The changes you recommended have exceeded expectations. Ethan smiled. That was encouraging. But Karen wasn't finished. Significantly exceeded expectations. Now he was interested. How significantly? Karen laughed. Let's just say our executive team is very happy. She continued. Inventory accuracy improved by nearly 20%. Shipping delays dropped dramatically. Operational costs are already decreasing. Ethan stared out the apartment window. The numbers were impressive. Extremely impressive. Then Karen delivered the real surprise. The board wants to hire you. Ethan blinked. What? Officially, we want a long-term consulting agreement. For several moments, he couldn't speak. The first real client. Not a favor, not a trial. A real client. A paying client. His heart started racing. What exactly are you looking for? Karen explained the details. Monthly consulting. Operational reviews. Expansion planning. Logistics optimization. Ongoing support. When she finished, Ethan remained silent. The opportunity was larger than expected. Much larger. Finally, he spoke. I'm interested. Karen laughed. We were hoping you'd say that. The meeting was scheduled for the following week. After hanging up, Ethan sat motionless. Then he stood. Then sat again. Then stood once more. He had absolutely no idea what to do. The first real victory had arrived. And somehow that felt almost as overwhelming as failure. When Sophia came home that evening, Ethan was still smiling. She immediately noticed. What happened? He handed her the contract proposal. Sophia read the first page. Then the second. Then the third. Her eyes widened. Oh my God? Ethan nodded. That's basically my reaction. Sophia looked at him. Then looked back at the proposal. Then back at him again. They hired you. They did. They actually hired you. They did. Sophia launched herself across the room and wrapped him in a hug. Neither could stop smiling. For the first time since quitting his job, the future felt real, not possible. Real. The contract was finalized 6 days later. The moment Ethan signed it, his consulting company officially became profitable. Not wildly profitable. Not life-changing. But profitable. And that mattered. A lot. The following month became even more exciting. Mitchell Manufacturing implemented additional recommendations. Results continued improving. Executives talked. Managers talked. Industry partners talked. Word spread. The business world was surprisingly small, especially among manufacturing companies. One success story often led directly to another. 2 weeks later, Ethan received another phone call. Then another. Then another. Companies wanted meetings, introductions, conversations, advice. For the first time in his career, opportunities were chasing him. Instead of the other way around. One particular meeting stood out. A struggling industrial equipment manufacturer invited Ethan to review its operations. The company had been losing money for nearly 3 years. Executives couldn't understand why. Consultants had already been hired. Nothing worked. Ethan spent 4 days analyzing the operation. What he discovered shocked him. The company wasn't failing because of production issues. It wasn't failing because of demand. It wasn't failing because of competition. It was failing because its distribution network was outdated. A problem almost nobody had noticed. Fortunately for Ethan, distribution happened to be his specialty. When he presented his findings, several executives looked skeptical. Until he showed the numbers. Then the room changed completely. The silence became intense. One executive finally leaned forward. If you're right. Ethan nodded. I am. The executive looked at the projections again, then shook his head. This would save millions. Exactly. Millions. The company implemented his recommendations immediately. 3 months later, the results became public. The manufacturer reported its strongest quarter in years. Industry publications took notice. Business newsletters took notice. Competitors took notice. And suddenly Ethan Carter's name began appearing in places he never expected. Articles, podcasts, industry discussions. Nothing major. Not yet. But enough. Enough to build momentum. Enough to attract attention. Enough to create something dangerous. Reputation. One evening, Ethan sat on the balcony of their apartment watching the city lights. Sophia joined him carrying 2 glasses of wine. She handed one over. Neither spoke for a moment. The city stretched endlessly before them. Thousands of lights. Thousands of people. Thousands of stories. Finally, Sophia broke the silence. "Do you remember the gala?" Ethan laughed. "Hard to forget." She nodded. "I was thinking about it today." "So was I." Sophia leaned back. "It's strange." "What is?" "At the time it felt like the worst night of our lives." Ethan looked at the skyline, then smiled. Maybe it was the best. Sophia smiled too, because she understood. Without the humiliation, without the anger, without the challenge, none of this would have happened. The consulting business wouldn't exist. The clients wouldn't exist. The opportunities wouldn't exist. The future wouldn't exist. The thought felt almost surreal. A single moment had changed everything. And the momentum was growing. Fast. Neither Ethan nor Sophia realized just how fast. Because across the city, inside the executive offices of Bennett Technologies, several senior leaders had begun discussing an unexpected topic. A consultant. An operations specialist. A rising problem solver. A man whose name kept appearing in conversations. Ethan Carter. The same man Ryan Hayes had publicly humiliated only a few months earlier. For now, Ryan remained unaware. But that wouldn't last much longer. Because Ethan's first success wasn't the finish line. It was merely the beginning. And the bigger Ethan's reputation became, the harder it would become for Ryan Hayes to ignore him. 6 months after Ethan Carter left the warehouse, his life looked completely different. The small dining table that once served as company headquarters was no longer large enough. The apartment room had become crowded with files, reports, contracts, and whiteboards. Client calls filled his calendar. Site visits consumed his weeks. New opportunities arrived faster than he could process them. The consulting business had grown beyond anything he imagined. Not into a massive company. Not yet, but into something real. Something sustainable. Something respected. For the first time in years, Ethan woke up excited. Every day brought new challenges, new problems, new solutions, new victories. The work was exhausting, but it felt meaningful. That difference changed everything. One Monday morning, Ethan arrived at a manufacturing facility outside Milwaukee. The company had hired him after hearing about his success with Mitchell Manufacturing. The situation looked familiar. Poor logistics, inefficient processes, leadership confusion, hidden opportunities. The same pattern appeared again and again. Most businesses weren't suffering from a lack of talent. They were suffering from a lack of clarity. Ethan had become remarkably good at providing that clarity. By lunchtime, he was walking through the warehouse with the company's operations director. The director shook his head repeatedly. "I don't understand how you keep finding these things." Ethan smiled. "What things?" "The expensive mistakes." The director pointed toward a storage area. "Our management team reviewed this operation for 2 years. You noticed the problem in 20 minutes. Ethan shrugged. "I spent 10 years in warehouses. Most people stop seeing details after a while. I learned to pay attention." The director laughed. "Well, it's making us money." That was becoming a common response. And every success created another referral, another introduction, another opportunity. Meanwhile, across the city, life inside Bennett Technologies was becoming increasingly complicated. Sophia noticed it first. The atmosphere had changed. Subtly, but noticeably. Meetings felt more tense. Executives seemed more nervous. Deadlines became more aggressive. Pressure increased throughout the organization. At first, nobody discussed it openly. Then the quarterly numbers arrived, and suddenly everyone understood. The company wasn't performing as expected. Revenue remained strong, but profits had declined. Several expansion projects were underperforming. Costs were rising. Investors were asking questions nobody wanted to answer. Sophia sat inside a leadership meeting reviewing the numbers. The room felt unusually quiet. Executives exchanged uncomfortable glances. Several department heads looked exhausted. At the far end of the conference table sat Ryan Hayes. And for the first time since she had known him, he looked worried. Not scared. Ryan Hayes rarely looked scared, but worried, definitely. The presentation continued. Charts filled the screen. Forecasts, projections, performance metrics. None of them looked particularly encouraging. Eventually, the CEO addressed the room. "We need solutions." Silence followed. The kind of silence that appears when nobody has a solution, or when nobody wants to speak first. Ryan finally leaned forward. "We're experiencing temporary market pressure." Sophia almost rolled her eyes. Temporary market pressure. The corporate version of saying everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. Several executives nodded anyway. The CEO wasn't convinced. Temporary. Ryan maintained his confidence. "Absolutely." The CEO stared at him. "Because investors aren't describing it as temporary." That statement landed heavily. Nobody responded. The meeting continued for another hour. By the time it ended, Sophia felt increasingly uneasy. Something wasn't right. The numbers told one story. Leadership told another. And the gap between those stories seemed to be growing. That evening, she arrived home later than usual. Ethan immediately noticed. "Tough day." Sophia dropped her bag onto the couch. "You have no idea." She collapsed beside him. For several moments, she simply stared at the ceiling. Then she laughed. A tired laugh. The kind people make when they're too exhausted to do anything else. Ethan handed her a glass of water. "Want to talk about it?" "Maybe." She sat up. "The company is struggling." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "How much?" "More than people realize." That got his attention. Sophia rarely discussed internal company matters. When she did, it usually meant something serious. "What's happening?" She thought carefully, then chose her words. "Imagine a house. Okay? The outside looks beautiful. Fresh paint. Perfect landscaping. Luxury appearance." Ethan nodded. "But," Sophia sighed, "the foundation is cracking. That wasn't good." "Not good at all." Ethan leaned forward. "What kind of cracks?" Sophia hesitated. "I can't discuss specifics." "Fair. But let's just say some strategic decisions aren't aging well." Immediately one name came to mind. Ryan Hayes. Sophia noticed his expression. "Don't." "What?" "Don't make this about Ryan." Ethan smiled. "Wasn't planning to." "Good." She pointed at him. "Because honestly, this is bigger than Ryan." That answer surprised him. Much bigger than Ryan. That implied serious problems. Very serious problems. Over the following weeks, additional signs appeared. Industry articles began questioning Bennett Technologies' performance. Analysts expressed concerns. Investors became increasingly vocal. Competitors started gaining market share. The company's public image remained strong. But underneath, pressure continued building. One afternoon, Ethan received an unexpected invitation. A private networking event for business owners and investors. The invitation alone surprised him. 6 months earlier, nobody would have recognized his name. Now investors wanted conversations. The event took place inside a luxury hotel overlooking Lake Michigan. The ballroom was filled with executives, entrepreneurs, and investment professionals. People who controlled enormous amounts of money. People who influenced industries. People Ethan once assumed he would never meet. At first he felt out of place. Then something unexpected happened. Several attendees recognized him. Not from personal meetings, from his work, from recommendations, from industry discussions. One investor approached during the reception. Ethan Carter. Ethan turned. Yes? The investor smiled. I've heard impressive things. Those 4 words felt surreal. 6 months ago, he was managing warehouse schedules. Now investors had heard impressive things. The conversation lasted nearly 30 minutes. Then another investor joined. Then another. By the end of the evening, Ethan had exchanged more business cards than he thought possible. The experience taught him something important. Success created access. Access created opportunities. And opportunities created even more success. Meanwhile, Ryan Hayes was having a very different experience. His division continued underperforming. Board members were asking difficult questions. Investors wanted explanations. Executives wanted answers. Pressure surrounded him from every direction. For years, Ryan had enjoyed a reputation as a rising corporate star. Now that reputation faced scrutiny, real scrutiny. One particularly brutal meeting left him furious. A board member openly challenged his strategic decisions. Another questioned expansion forecasts. A third criticized cost overruns. The criticism wasn't public, but it was damaging, very damaging. Ryan left the meeting angry and worried, because for the first time in his career, confidence wasn't enough. Results mattered, and the results weren't cooperating. That same evening, Sophia received a call from a colleague. Someone she trusted, someone with access to information. The conversation lasted only 10 minutes. But it changed everything. After hanging up, she sat silently on the couch, thinking, processing, trying to understand what she had just learned. When Ethan arrived home, he immediately sensed something was wrong. Sophia? She looked up. Her expression was unusually serious. Ethan, what happened? She hesitated, then spoke quietly. Ryan's division lost a major contract. Ethan frowned. Okay? You don't understand. Sophia leaned forward. The contract was worth hundreds of millions. Now he understood. That wasn't a setback. That was a disaster. A massive one. Sophia continued. And apparently several board members are furious. The room fell silent. Neither spoke for a moment, because both understood what it meant. The cracks were getting bigger. Much bigger. The company's problems were no longer hidden. They were becoming visible. Publicly visible. Dangerously visible. Later that night, Ethan stood alone on the apartment balcony. The city lights stretched endlessly across the horizon. Traffic moved below. Buildings glowed against the darkness. Somewhere out there sat Bennett Technologies, a company he had spent months studying. A company filled with opportunities. A company increasingly plagued by mistakes. His phone buzzed. A new email. He opened it. The message came from an investment firm he had met at the networking event. They wanted a meeting, not about consulting, about business opportunities, potential partnerships, potential investments, potential acquisitions. Ethan stared at the message, then looked back at the skyline. Something was changing. The consulting business was growing. His network was expanding. Investors were paying attention. And Bennett Technologies was weakening. For the first time, the future looked larger than consulting. Much larger. He couldn't yet see the full picture, but he could feel it forming, like distant thunder before a storm. And somewhere inside the executive offices of Bennett Technologies, Ryan Hayes was desperately trying to hold together an empire that was beginning to crack. He still believed he was untouchable. Still believed he controlled the game. Still believed Ethan Carter was irrelevant. The irony was almost unbelievable, because while Ryan fought to protect what he already had, Ethan was quietly building something far more dangerous. Momentum. And momentum, once it begins, is incredibly difficult to stop. By the beginning of the following year, Ethan Carter's consulting business had become something he no longer recognized. What started at a dining room table had evolved into a growing company. 3 full-time employees. 2 analysts. 1 project manager. Multiple active clients. and more work than they could comfortably handle. The growth felt surreal. Only months earlier, Ethan had been worrying about whether he could pay the next month's bills. Now he spent most of his time deciding which opportunities to accept and which to decline. Success had solved many problems, but it had also created new ones, bigger ones, more complicated ones. One Monday morning, Ethan sat inside his downtown office reviewing proposals with his team. The office wasn't extravagant. No marble floors, no luxury furniture, no private elevator, just clean workspaces, large windows, and people focused on solving problems. Exactly the kind of environment Ethan preferred. His project manager entered carrying a folder. "You need to see this." Ethan looked up. "What is it?" "A meeting request." "Okay?" The manager smiled. "No, not okay. Weird." That got his attention. Ethan opened the folder. Inside was a handwritten invitation. Not an email. Not a digital request. A handwritten invitation. The sender's name immediately stood out. Charles Whitmore. Ethan frowned. The name sounded familiar. Very familiar. Then realization hit. Charles Whitmore. One of the wealthiest investors in the Midwest. A legendary businessman. A man whose acquisitions had built a fortune worth billions. Ethan looked up. This Charles Whitmore. His manager nodded. The Charles Whitmore. For several moments, Ethan simply stared. There had to be a mistake. Someone like Charles Whitmore didn't invite people like Ethan to private meetings. At least not normally. Yet the invitation appeared genuine. Very genuine. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday. Private location. No additional details. No explanation. No agenda. Just a time and place. The mystery bothered Ethan all week. By Thursday afternoon, curiosity had completely replaced caution. The address led him to an exclusive private club overlooking Lake Michigan. The kind of place where powerful people conducted business away from cameras and reporters. A host greeted him immediately. "Mr. Carter." "This way." Clearly they were expecting him. The host guided him through elegant hallways and private dining areas. Eventually they reached a secluded room. The door opened. Inside sat a man in his 70s. Silver hair, sharp blue eyes, perfect posture. The kind of presence that instantly commanded respect. Charles Whitmore, the billionaire himself. The older man smiled. "Ethan Carter." Ethan extended his hand. "Mr. Whitmore." Charles shook it firmly. "Please, Charles." They sat. For several moments neither spoke. Charles studied him carefully, not rudely, not aggressively, simply observing, evaluating. The silence felt intentional. Finally, Charles smiled. "You know why you're here?" Ethan laughed. "I was hoping you would tell me." That earned a genuine chuckle. "Fair answer." Charles leaned back. "I've been watching your work." The statement immediately surprised Ethan. "Watching? For how long?" Charles answered before he could ask. "Almost 7 months." Ethan blinked. 7 months. Approximately. The billionaire sipped his coffee. Mitchell Manufacturing. Rockwell Industrial. Central Distribution. I've reviewed all of it. Now Ethan was genuinely stunned. Most people didn't even know those projects existed. Charles clearly knew every detail. The older man continued. "Do you know what impressed me most?" Ethan shook his head. "The solutions." Charles smiled. They weren't complicated. That answer confused him. Charles noticed. Most consultants try to sound intelligent. They create complexity. You create clarity. The billionaire pointed toward him. That's rare. The conversation lasted nearly 2 hours. Business, leadership, growth, risk, success, failure. The discussion felt less like a meeting and more like a masterclass. Every question Charles asked revealed another layer of insight, another perspective, another lesson. By the end, Ethan understood why the man had become so successful. Charles Whitmore saw opportunities where others saw obstacles, patterns where others saw chaos, potential where others saw limitations. Eventually, the billionaire asked a question that changed everything. "What are your long-term plans?" Ethan thought carefully. then answered honestly, "I don't know." Charles smiled. "Wrong answer." Ethan laughed. "It happens." "No, who?" The older man shook his head. "You do know. You just haven't admitted it yet." That statement landed harder than expected, because deep down, Charles was right. Ethan had been thinking bigger, much bigger. He simply hadn't said it aloud. Charles leaned forward. "You're not building a consulting company." "I'm not." "No. No." The billionaire smiled knowingly. "You're building a platform." The room fell silent. A platform. The word echoed inside Ethan's mind. Charles continued. "Consulting gives you information. Information creates insight. Insight reveals opportunities." He pointed toward the city skyline beyond the window. "Eventually you'll stop fixing businesses. You'll start owning them." Ethan stared. The idea sounded absurd, impossible, ridiculous. Yet strangely, it didn't feel impossible. Not anymore. Charles noticed the reaction immediately. "There it is." "What?" "The look." Ethan frowned. "What look?" "The moment someone realizes they're thinking too small." For several seconds neither spoke. The billionaire simply smiled, as if he had witnessed that moment many times before. Then Charles delivered another surprise. "I'd like to help." Ethan blinked. "Help? Mentorship?" The word hung in the air. Mentorship. Not investment. Not acquisition. Mentorship. Charles continued. "I don't give many people my time. Frankly, most aren't worth it." Ethan laughed. Honesty seems to be a recurring theme among billionaires. Charles grinned. "It saves time." The older man became serious again. "You have talent. But talent without guidance often gets wasted." He leaned forward. "I'd like to prevent that." Ethan left the meeting feeling as though reality had shifted. Again, the city looked different. The future looked different. Everything looked different. For years he had viewed success through a narrow lens. A better job, higher income, more stability. Now someone who had built billion-dollar companies was suggesting something much larger. Ownership, acquisition, scale. The possibilities felt endless and terrifying. That evening he told Sophia everything. Every detail, every conversation, every lesson. She listened without interruption. When he finished, she stared at him, then smiled. "What?" Sophia laughed softly. "Do you realize what's happening?" Ethan frowned. "Not really." "I do." She leaned forward. "Ethan, the people you used to admire from a distance. Yes, they're starting to see you as one of them." The realization hit hard, because it was true. Investors called him. Executives sought his advice. Business owners trusted his judgment, and now a billionaire wanted to mentor him. The transformation felt unreal. Yet it was happening, one step at a time. Over the next several months, Charles became a regular presence in Ethan's life. Not daily, not even weekly, but often enough. Each meeting provided new insights, new connections, new opportunities. Charles introduced him to investors, private equity groups, business owners, people Ethan would never have met otherwise. Doors opened, important doors, powerful doors. The growth accelerated. By summer, Ethan's company had expanded into multiple states. New offices opened, new employees joined, new contracts arrived. Revenue increased dramatically. The operation was no longer a startup. It was becoming a serious business. A very serious business. Meanwhile, inside Bennett Technologies, problems continued growing. The company's challenges were becoming increasingly difficult to hide. Profit margins continued shrinking. Projects underperformed. Investor confidence weakened. Board meetings became more tense, more confrontational, more desperate. Sophia witnessed it firsthand. Leadership seemed increasingly divided. Some executives pushed for aggressive expansion. Others demanded cost reductions. Nobody seemed completely certain what direction to take. The uncertainty created fear, and fear created mistakes. One evening, after another stressful day, Sophia joined Ethan in his office. The city skyline glowed beyond the windows. She looked exhausted. "Ethan." "Yeah." I think the company is in more trouble than people realize. His expression immediately changed. How bad? Sophia hesitated, then answered quietly. Bad enough that some board members are discussing outside options. Outside options. She nodded. Partnerships. Investments. Potential buyers. The room fell silent. Potential buyers, that was significant. Very significant. Because companies didn't discuss buyers unless serious concerns existed. Ethan looked out the window. Far across the city stood the headquarters of Bennett Technologies. A company he had studied for months. A company filled with inefficiencies. A company increasingly vulnerable. Charles Whitmore's words suddenly echoed in his mind. Eventually you'll stop fixing businesses. You'll start owning them. For the first time, Ethan didn't dismiss the idea. For the first time, he wondered what ownership might actually look like. And somewhere inside the upper floors of Bennett Technologies, Ryan Hayes remained focused on protecting his position. Still confident. Still ambitious. Still convinced he would eventually become CEO. Completely unaware that powerful investors were beginning to discuss futures that didn't include him. Or perhaps more importantly, shiny. Futures that might eventually include Ethan Carter. The promotion came on a Tuesday morning. Sophia Bennett wasn't expecting it. In fact, she had walked into work fully prepared for another exhausting day of meetings, budget reviews, and executive disagreements. The past few months had been difficult for everyone inside Bennett Technologies. Pressure from investors continued increasing. Departments were being scrutinized. Performance metrics were being examined more aggressively than ever before. Mistakes that once went unnoticed suddenly attracted attention. Every executive felt it. Every manager felt it. And increasingly, every employee felt it too. Sophia arrived at headquarters shortly after 7. The towering glass building reflected the morning sunlight across downtown Chicago. Normally she enjoyed the view. Today she barely noticed it. Her calendar was packed. 3 meetings before lunch. 2 presentations. 1 strategy review. And an executive planning session that she was already dreading. As she stepped into the elevator, several coworkers greeted her. Something felt different. People smiled more than usual. A few seemed unusually excited. One colleague even offered congratulations. Sophia frowned. Congratulations for what? The woman simply smiled. I guess you'll find out. That answer confused her. By the time she reached her office, curiosity had replaced annoyance. Her phone rang almost immediately. The caller ID displayed the CEO's office. That certainly wasn't normal. Sophia answered. This is Sophia. Good morning. The CEO's assistant sounded cheerful. The CEO would like to see you. Sophia immediately assumed something was wrong. Very wrong. People rarely got summoned to the executive floor unexpectedly. And when they did, the news was often unpleasant. Still, she remained calm. I'll be right there. 5 minutes later, she stepped into one of the largest offices in the building. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline. Elegant furniture filled the room. Several board members sat around a conference table. The CEO stood near the window. Sophia immediately recognized most of the faces, which only increased her anxiety. Why were board members present? The CEO smiled. Relax. That was never a reassuring thing to hear. Sophia forced a smile. I'll try. The room laughed. Then the CEO gestured toward an empty chair. Please sit. Sophia obeyed. The CEO remained standing. For several moments he said nothing. Then he finally spoke. We've been reviewing leadership performance across the company. Sophia's stomach tightened. We've also been discussing succession planning. Now she was even more nervous. The CEO smiled. Fortunately, this is the good kind of meeting. Relief washed across her immediately. Several board members smiled. One nodded approvingly. Then the CEO delivered the news. We'd like to promote you. Sophia blinked. What? The CEO continued. Effective immediately, you'll become Senior Vice President of Corporate Development. The room disappeared. For a brief moment, Sophia wasn't entirely sure she had heard correctly. Senior Vice President. One of the highest-ranking positions in the company, a role typically reserved for executives with decades of experience. Not someone in her early 30s. The CEO smiled. "We believe you've earned it." Sophia struggled to find words. That almost never happened. Finally, she managed a response. "Thank you." One board member laughed. "That's probably the most speechless I've ever seen you." The room laughed again. Sophia felt overwhelmed, proud, excited, grateful, terrified, all at the same time. Because promotions weren't just opportunities. They were responsibilities. And this one came with enormous responsibility. The meeting continued for nearly an hour. New duties, expanded authority, additional oversight, larger budgets, more strategic influence. By the time she left the executive floor, her entire career had changed. News spread through headquarters almost instantly. Emails arrived. Phone calls followed. Congratulations poured in from every department. Many were sincere. Some weren't. That was the nature of corporate life. Success attracted both admiration and resentment. Sophia understood that. What she didn't expect was Ryan Hayes. She encountered him shortly before lunch. He was standing near the executive elevators when she rounded the corner. The moment their eyes met, she knew he had already heard. The smile on his face looked convincing. His eyes told a different story. "Sophia, Ryan." He extended his hand. "Congratulations." Sophia shook it politely. "Thank you." Ryan maintained the smile. "Quite the promotion." "It is." "I'm surprised." There it was. The subtle insult hidden beneath the compliment. Sophia recognized it immediately. She had seen Ryan use that tactic for years. Not. Ryan's smile tightened slightly. Interesting. That answer hadn't gone as planned. For a moment neither spoke. Then Ryan laughed. Still confident. "Usually." "Good." Ryan nodded. "You'll need it." Something about his tone bothered her. Not openly hostile. Just enough to create discomfort. Just enough to remind her who she was dealing with. The conversation ended quickly. But as Sophia walked away, she felt his eyes following her. And she didn't like it. Not one bit. That evening she met Ethan for dinner. A small restaurant overlooking the river, one of their favorite places. The moment she arrived, Ethan knew. The smile gave it away. "You got promoted." Sophia laughed. "How do you always know?" "Your smile." She sat down. "It's that obvious?" "Very?" Sophia couldn't stop smiling. The excitement remained overwhelming. When she told him the details, Ethan nearly dropped his glass. "Senior Vice President." She nodded. Ethan stared. Then laughed. Then shook his head. Then laughed again. "I remember when you were nervous about becoming a department manager." "I remember that too." "No, look at you." The pride in his voice warmed her heart. Because Ethan never felt threatened by her success. Never competed with her. Never tried to diminish her accomplishments. He celebrated them. Genuinely. That quality had always made him different. And she loved him for it. They spent the evening celebrating. Talking. Dreaming. For a few hours, everything felt perfect. Unfortunately, perfection rarely lasted. The problems began 2 weeks later. Subtle at first. A delayed report. Missing information. Unexpected resistance from another department. Nothing dramatic. Nothing obvious. Just enough to create frustration. Sophia initially dismissed it as normal corporate bureaucracy. Large organizations always contained inefficiencies. Then the incidents became more frequent. A presentation disappeared before an important meeting. Critical financial data arrived late. Several projects encountered unusual delays. Patterns began emerging, and Sophia hated patterns, especially suspicious ones. One afternoon, she met with a trusted colleague, a director who had worked inside the company for over a decade. After discussing several project issues, the colleague hesitated, then leaned forward. "Sophia?" "Yes. I probably shouldn't say this." That immediately got her attention. What is it? The woman lowered her voice. Be careful. Sophia frowned. About what? The director looked around to ensure nobody was listening, then answered quietly. Ryan. The name instantly changed the atmosphere. What about Ryan? The woman hesitated, then continued. Is not happy about your promotion. Sophia almost laughed. That's hardly breaking news. No. The director shook her head. You don't understand. The woman leaned closer. I've overheard conversations. What conversations? He thinks the position should have gone to him. Sophia wasn't surprised. Ryan believed many things should belong to him. Promotions, recognition, power, control. The director continued. And apparently he's blaming you for several recent board decisions. That surprised her. What board decisions? I don't know. But he's angry. Very angry. Sophia thanked her colleague and returned to her office. The warning lingered throughout the afternoon. Not because she feared Ryan. She didn't. But because Ryan had a history. A history of turning professional disagreements into personal battles. And powerful people could be dangerous when they felt threatened, especially people accustomed to winning. That evening, she shared the conversation with Ethan. His expression immediately darkened. You think he's serious? Sophia shrugged, probably. Should I be worried? No. Then she paused. Maybe a little. Ethan didn't like that answer. Not at all. Over the following month, additional signs appeared. Several executives who previously supported Sophia became strangely distant. Certain meetings excluded her unexpectedly. Important information occasionally arrived late. The pattern was becoming difficult to ignore. Someone was creating obstacles. Deliberately. The question was why. Deep down, Sophia already knew the answer. Jealousy. Ryan Hayes wasn't afraid of losing a promotion. He was afraid of losing influence. Afraid of losing control, afraid of becoming irrelevant, and every time Sophia succeeded, that fear grew stronger. One evening she remained in the office long after most employees had gone home. The executive floor felt unusually quiet. Dark windows reflected the city lights. Empty hallways stretched in every direction. As she reviewed project reports, a troubling realization slowly emerged. The obstacles weren't random. They were coordinated, carefully coordinated. Someone was intentionally making her job more difficult. Someone with access. Someone with influence. Someone powerful. Sophia leaned back in her chair. Her eyes drifted toward the skyline. Far beyond the windows, thousands of lights illuminated the city. Somewhere among them sat Ethan's growing company. Growing stronger. Growing faster. While Bennett Technologies seemed increasingly determined to sabotage itself from within. The irony wasn't lost on her, because while Ethan spent his days solving problems, Ryan Hayes appeared determined to create them. And if Sophia's suspicions were correct, his actions would eventually have consequences. Serious consequences. The only question was how much damage he would cause before those consequences arrived. Because for the first time in years, Ryan Hayes wasn't the rising star everyone believed him to be. He was a man watching power slowly slip through his fingers. And desperate people often make dangerous mistakes. The first piece of evidence arrived on a rainy Thursday evening. At first glance, it looked insignificant. Just another spreadsheet. Just another financial report. Just another collection of numbers. Yet within those numbers lay the beginning of a disaster. Sophia Bennett discovered it completely by accident. She had stayed late again. The executive floor was nearly empty. Most employees had already gone home. The city lights reflected against the rain-covered windows. Thunder rumbled somewhere in the distance. Normally she would have left hours earlier, but a delayed project review required additional analysis. One report led to another, then another. Eventually she found herself reviewing financial summaries connected to several strategic initiatives, and something felt wrong, very wrong. Sophia couldn't immediately explain why. The numbers appeared normal, profits, losses, revenue forecasts, budget allocations. Everything looked exactly as expected, yet a feeling continued nagging at her. A small inconsistency, a tiny detail, the kind of thing most people ignored. Sophia never ignored details. She opened another report, then another, then another. Slowly the pieces began aligning. Her heart rate increased. The discrepancy wasn't large. Not initially, but it appeared repeatedly. Different departments, different quarters, different projects. The same pattern, again, and again, and again. Revenue projections seemed unusually optimistic. Cost estimates appeared strangely conservative. Losses were being categorized in unusual ways. Individually, none of it looked alarming. Collectively, it looked deliberate. Sophia sat back in her chair. Rain tapped softly against the glass. The office felt suddenly colder, because she recognized what she was seeing. Someone was manipulating perception, not necessarily committing fraud. Not yet, but definitely presenting reality in the most favorable way possible. The question was why? And more importantly, who? The answer arrived faster than expected. Almost every questionable report shared one common connection. Strategic operations. Ryan Hayes' division. Sophia stared at the screen, her stomach tightened. No, surely not. Ryan was arrogant, competitive, egotistical, but manipulating company reporting. That was different. Far different. The accusation felt too serious, too dangerous, too unbelievable. Yet the evidence continued growing. The more documents she reviewed, the worse it became. Eventually the cleaning crew arrived, then left. The office floor became completely empty. Still Sophia remained at her desk. Hours passed. Midnight came and went. By 1 in the morning, she had assembled an entire folder of questionable reports. The pattern could no longer be ignored. Something was wrong. And Ryan's division sat at the center of it. The following morning she arrived at headquarters exhausted. Coffee barely helped. Neither did breakfast. Her mind remained focused on the reports, the numbers, the inconsistencies, the questions. She needed answers. Unfortunately, answers inside large corporations were rarely simple, especially when powerful executives were involved. Sophia spent the day quietly gathering information. Nothing obvious, nothing suspicious. Just conversations, questions, observations. The responses worried her. Several managers seemed uncomfortable discussing certain projects. Others avoided specific topics entirely. A few appeared genuinely nervous. Fear. Sophia recognized it immediately. And fear inside organizations usually pointed toward larger problems. That evening, she met Ethan at their favorite restaurant. Normally, she enjoyed these dinners. Tonight, she barely touched her food. Ethan noticed immediately. Something happened. It wasn't a question. Sophia sighed. Maybe. Ethan waited patiently, the way he always did. Finally, she spoke. I think I found something. What kind of something? She hesitated. Even discussing it felt dangerous. Potential financial manipulation. The words landed heavily. Ethan stared, then slowly set down his fork. That's serious. I know. What kind of manipulation? Sophia shook her head. I don't have enough information yet. But enough to worry me. The silence that followed felt uncomfortable. Very uncomfortable. Because both understood the implications. If her suspicions were correct, the consequences could be enormous. For the company, for investors, for employees, for everyone, including her, especially her. The next week became increasingly tense. Sophia continued investigating quietly, carefully, methodically. The deeper she looked, the more troubling information emerged. Certain losses had been delayed. Certain forecasts had been exaggerated. Certain risks had been minimized, always in ways that benefited specific strategic initiatives, always in ways that protected certain decisions, and almost always connected to Ryan's division. One afternoon she discovered something that truly frightened her. An internal presentation, prepared for board members. The presentation contained projections she knew were inaccurate. Not slightly inaccurate, significantly inaccurate. The numbers painted a picture of success. Reality painted something very different. Sophia stared at the screen. A cold feeling settled in her chest. This wasn't optimism. This wasn't interpretation. This was deception. The realization forced a difficult question. What should she do? The obvious answer seemed simple. Report it. Expose it. Tell the truth. But reality wasn't simple. Reality involved politics, power, careers, consequences. Ryan Hayes wasn't a middle manager. He wasn't some junior executive. He was one of the most influential leaders in the company. Accusing him without absolute proof would be career suicide. Possibly worse. Sophia understood exactly how dangerous the situation had become. That night she couldn't sleep. She lay awake staring at the ceiling while Ethan slept beside her. The clock slowly moved through the early morning hours. 1 o'clock. 3 o'clock. Her mind refused to rest. Because she faced an impossible choice. Protect herself. Or protect the company. Protect her career. Or protect the truth. Every option carried risk. Every option carried consequences. By sunrise, she still hadn't decided. The following day delivered another surprise. Ryan Hayes requested a private meeting. The email appeared shortly after lunch. Sophia immediately felt uneasy. Very uneasy. The meeting took place inside Ryan's executive office. The atmosphere felt strangely formal. Too formal. Ryan greeted her with an unusually friendly smile. That alone raised alarms. Ryan wasn't known for friendliness. Not genuine friendliness. Thanks for coming. Sophia sat across from him. What can I do for you? Ryan leaned back. For several moments he simply studied her. Then he smiled. I've heard good things. Sophia remained silent. Ryan continued. Your promotion. Your recent projects. Your growing influence. There it was. The real topic, influence. Power. Status. The things Ryan cared about most. I'm glad to hear that. Ryan nodded. Then his smile faded slightly. You know, Sophia, we've known each other a long time. Too long, she thought. We have. Ryan folded his hands. I'd hate to see unnecessary conflict develop. The statement immediately triggered warning signals. What kind of conflict? Ryan smiled again. A careful smile. A dangerous smile. The kind that happens when people misunderstand information. The room suddenly felt smaller. Much smaller. Sophia kept her expression neutral. What information? Ryan held her gaze. For several seconds neither spoke, then he answered. Executive information. There it was. Not a threat. Not directly, but close enough. Ryan knew. Or at least suspected. Sophia's pulse quickened. Yet she refused to react. Refused to give in anything. The meeting ended shortly afterward. Neither openly acknowledged what had happened. Neither needed to. The message was clear. Ryan was aware that questions were being asked, and he wanted those questions to stop. Unfortunately for him, the meeting achieved the opposite effect. If anything, it confirmed Sophia's suspicions. Because innocent people rarely behave that way. That evening she arrived home carrying a flash drive. Ethan noticed immediately. What's that? Sophia stared at the device. The tiny piece of metal suddenly felt incredibly important. Difficult decisions. Ethan frowned. What does that mean? She sat beside him, then took a deep breath. Over the next hour she explained everything. The reports. The discrepancies. The meeting. The warning. The growing evidence. When she finished, Ethan remained silent. Not because he lacked opinions. Because he was thinking carefully. Finally he spoke. What happens if you're right? Sophia looked away. I don't know. What happens if you're wrong? She sighed. I probably destroy my career. The room fell quiet. Neither liked those possibilities. Not one bit. Ethan eventually reached for her hand. What does your conscience say? The question hit harder than expected. Because deep down she already knew. Her conscience wasn't confused. Her conscience wasn't uncertain. Her conscience had been screaming the answer for days. Tell the truth. No matter the cost. Sophia looked at the flash drive. Inside were documents, evidence, questions, possibly proof. Enough to change lives. Enough to destroy careers. Enough to expose a betrayal that reached far deeper than anyone realized. And as thunder rolled across the city outside their apartment windows, Sophia made a decision. She would keep investigating. No matter where the evidence led. No matter who it implicated. No matter what it cost her. Because some things mattered more than promotions, more than careers, more than fear. The truth was one of them. What Sophia didn't realize was that her decision had just set a chain of events into motion. Events that would eventually shake Bennett Technologies to its foundation. Events that would bring powerful people crashing down. And events that would place Ethan Carter closer than ever to the company that once laughed at him. The betrayal was real. The evidence was growing. And the storm was only beginning. The storm arrived faster than anyone expected. 3 weeks after Sophia discovered the financial discrepancies, Bennett Technologies faced its worst quarter in nearly a decade. The numbers were impossible to hide. Investors saw them. Analysts saw them. The financial media saw them. And for the first time, the company's carefully polished image began to crack in public. Stock prices fell. Industry confidence weakened. Questions multiplied. Inside headquarters, tension reached levels Sophia had never witnessed before. Every hallway conversation seemed urgent. Every executive meeting felt defensive. Every department appeared to be bracing for impact. The atmosphere reminded her of a building that looked stable from the outside while the foundation shifted underneath. Nobody wanted to admit there was a problem. Yet everyone knew there was. The board knew. Investors knew. Senior leadership definitely knew. The only question remaining was how bad things really were. And nobody seemed willing to answer honestly. One Monday morning, Sophia entered a board strategy meeting that immediately felt different. Very different. Normally discussions focused on growth, expansion, future opportunities. This meeting focused on survival, cost reductions, asset evaluations, capital restructuring. The language alone revealed how serious the situation had become. She sat quietly reviewing documents while executives debated solutions. Most proposals sounded temporary, reactionary, desperate, the kind of ideas organizations create when they run out of better options. Then a board member asked a question that changed everything. What about strategic acquisition discussions? The room fell silent, completely silent. Several executives immediately looked away. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Sophia felt her pulse quicken. Strategic acquisition. Corporate language for something much larger. Potential sale. Potential buyout. Potential takeover. The possibility had officially entered the conversation. The CEO answered carefully. We've received inquiries. That statement landed heavily. Received inquiries. Plural. More than one. The room grew even quieter. Another board member leaned forward. How serious are they? The CEO hesitated. Then answered. Serious enough to warrant discussion. Sophia felt a chill. For months she had sensed trouble. Now the board was openly discussing acquisition possibilities. The situation was clearly worse than most employees realized. Much worse. The meeting continued for 2 more hours. When it finally ended, nobody looked relieved. Nobody looked optimistic. If anything, everyone appeared more concerned than before. As Sophia walked back to her office, one realization became impossible to ignore. Bennett Technologies was vulnerable. Very vulnerable. Meanwhile, across the city, Ethan Carter was experiencing a completely different kind of pressure. His consulting company had continued expanding rapidly. New clients arrived every month. Revenue increased steadily. Investors called regularly. The business was thriving. Yet Ethan found himself increasingly distracted. Not by consulting. By ownership. The idea Charles Whitmore planted months earlier refused to disappear. Eventually you'll stop fixing businesses. You'll start owning them. The words echoed constantly. especially now, because Ethan was beginning to recognize something. Consulting allowed him to solve problems. Ownership allowed him to control outcomes. That distinction mattered a lot. One afternoon, he met Charles for lunch at their usual private club. The billionaire immediately noticed Ethan's distracted expression. "Something on your mind?" It wasn't a question. Ethan laughed. "That obvious?" "Very." Charles smiled. "Talk." Ethan explained his growing frustration. The endless cycle, company after company, problem after problem, solution after solution. The work remained rewarding, but something felt incomplete. Charles listened patiently, then nodded. "Good." Ethan frowned. "Good. Very good." The billionaire leaned back. "It means you're evolving." That answer wasn't particularly helpful. Charles noticed, then smiled. Consultants improve businesses. Owners build them. The statement felt familiar, because it reflected exactly what Ethan had been feeling. Charles continued, "You've spent the last year learning. No, you're starting to think differently." "Like what?" "Like an investor." The word lingered. Investor. For most of his life, investors belonged to another world. A world of boardrooms, private jets, and billion-dollar decisions. Not warehouses. Not ordinary people. Not Ethan Carter. Yet somehow that world was no longer distant. It was approaching. Fast. Charles finished his coffee, then casually delivered a sentence that changed everything. "Have you looked at Bennett Technologies recently?" Ethan froze. The coincidence felt impossible. "What?" But Charles smiled knowingly. "I'll take that as a yes." Ethan stared. "Why are you asking?" The billionaire folded his hands. "Because several investment groups are discussing it." The room suddenly felt very quiet. Several investment groups discussing Bennett Technologies. Not studying, not analyzing, discussing. That implied opportunity, real opportunity. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. How serious? Charles held his gaze. Serious enough. For several moments neither spoke. The implications were enormous. Bennett Technologies wasn't some small regional company. It was a major corporation. Acquiring it would require enormous capital, massive resources, powerful investors. The kind of deal Ethan couldn't even imagine participating in. At least not yet. Charles seemed to read his thoughts. "You're thinking too small again." Ethan laughed. "I don't have billions of dollars." "No?" Charles agreed. "But acquisitions aren't individual efforts." That answer stayed with Ethan long after lunch ended. That evening he found himself researching Bennett Technologies once again. Only this time, he wasn't looking at operational problems. He was evaluating opportunity. A completely different perspective. Revenue streams, assets, liabilities, growth potential, market position, competitive advantages. The deeper he looked, the more intriguing the company became. The problems were obvious, but so was the potential. A properly managed Bennett Technologies could be extremely valuable. Extremely. Sophia arrived home around 8. She immediately noticed the report spread across the dining table. Again. "You've been looking at Bennett." Ethan smiled. "Maybe." Sophia sat beside him. For a moment neither spoke. Then she asked quietly, "Did Charles bring it up?" Ethan stared. "How did you know?" Sophia laughed. "Because everyone is talking about it." That answer surprised him. Everyone. Executives. Board members. Investors. She shook her head. "The rumors are everywhere." The room fell silent. The rumors were real. Not speculation. Not imagination. Real. Sophia studied several reports, then looked at Ethan. "You know what's strange?" "What?" "A year ago you were researching this company because Ryan humiliated you." Ethan smiled. "That's true." Now you're researching it because investors might buy it." The contrast felt almost unbelievable. A year earlier he was a warehouse supervisor sitting at a dining table filled with frustration. Now he was discussing acquisition opportunities with billionaires. Life moved strangely sometimes. Very strangely. Over the following month, rumors intensified. Several financial publications reported increased interest in Bennett Technologies. Industry analysts speculated openly. Investors became more active. The stock price fluctuated wildly. Inside headquarters, uncertainty grew. Employees whispered in hallways. Managers exchanged theories. Nobody seemed to know what was happening. Yet everyone sensed change approaching. Even Ryan Hayes. The pressure surrounding him had become relentless. Board scrutiny increased. Performance reviews intensified. Several strategic initiatives faced investigation. His confidence remained visible, but cracks were beginning to show. For the first time in years, Ryan wasn't controlling the narrative. Events were moving beyond his influence, and he hated it. One evening, Sophia attended a private executive dinner. The gathering included several board members. Most discussions remained casual. Then one board member made an offhand comment. A comment that immediately captured her attention. "We may not have much choice." Another executive nodded. Agreed. The board member sighed. "If the right offer appears, we'll have to consider it." Sophia felt her stomach tighten. There it was. Confirmation. Not rumors. Not speculation. Reality. The board was actively considering a sale. The acquisition opportunity was no longer theoretical. It was becoming inevitable. That night she shared everything with Ethan. Every detail. Every conversation. Every hint. When she finished, neither spoke for a moment. The city lights glowed outside their apartment windows. The future felt unusually close. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "If the company gets sold." Sophia looked at him. "Yeah." He hesitated, then asked the question that had been forming in his mind for weeks. "What kind of people do you think should own it?" Sophia considered carefully, then smiled. "The kind who actually know how to fix it." The answer seemed simple, yet somehow it felt significant. Because as Ethan looked out across the city skyline, he couldn't stop thinking about Charles Whitmore. The investors, the opportunities, the conversations. For the first time, a possibility appeared that would have sounded insane a year ago. What if he didn't just advise the future owners? What if he became one? The thought felt impossible. Ambitious, dangerous. Yet strangely, not completely unrealistic. And somewhere inside Bennett Technologies, powerful people were preparing for negotiations that would determine the company's future. Most believed the buyers would come from Wall Street. Private equity firms. Corporate giants. Billion-dollar institutions. None of them imagined that a former warehouse supervisor might eventually walk into those negotiations. Not as an employee, not as a consultant, but as something far more powerful. A buyer. The idea should have sounded ridiculous. A year earlier, Ethan Carter had been managing warehouse schedules. Now he found himself considering participation in one of the largest corporate acquisitions in the Midwest. On paper, the idea bordered on insanity. In reality, it was becoming a possibility. Not because Ethan suddenly possessed billions of dollars. He didn't, not even close. But because he was finally beginning to understand something Charles Whitmore had been teaching him for months. Major acquisitions were rarely about one person's money. They were about assembling the right people, the right investors, the right vision, the right opportunity. And Bennett Technologies was rapidly becoming an opportunity nobody could ignore. The company's problems continued worsening. Quarterly results disappointed investors again. Analysts downgraded projections. Industry confidence weakened further. Every negative headline made the company more vulnerable, and every sign of vulnerability attracted new interest, especially from investors. One morning, Ethan arrived at his office to find his team unusually excited. His operations manager entered, carrying a financial publication. "You need to see this?" Ethan accepted the magazine. The headline immediately caught his attention. Bennett Technologies reportedly exploring strategic alternatives. Corporate language. Polite language. But everyone knew what it meant. The company was officially exploring a potential sale. The rumors had become reality. His manager sat across from him. "You've been talking about this company for months." Ethan smiled. "I have. You thinking what I think you're thinking?" Ethan laughed. "Depends." The manager pointed at the article. "You want in?" The room fell silent. Because the answer was obvious. Ethan did want in. The question was whether that desire was realistic. His manager seemed to know exactly what he was thinking. "You should talk to Charles." That afternoon, Ethan did exactly that. The meeting took place inside Charles Whitmore's private office overlooking Lake Michigan. The billionaire appeared unsurprised, almost amused. As expected. Ethan frowned. "What?" Charles leaned back. "I knew you'd eventually arrive here." "We're." The ownership conversation. The older man smiled. "Most entrepreneurs reach this point eventually." Ethan studied him carefully. "Do you think it's possible?" Charles answered immediately. "Yes." The speed of the response surprised him. No hesitation, no uncertainty. Just, "Yes." Charles continued. "Possible doesn't mean easy or likely, but possible." "Absolutely." The billionaire stood and walked toward the window. The skyline stretched beyond the glass. Powerful, massive, endless. "Tell me something." Charles turned. "What makes Bennett Technologies valuable?" Ethan answered immediately. "The assets. The distribution network. The customer relationships. The market position." Charles nodded. "Good. What makes it vulnerable?" "The leadership. The inefficiencies. The declining confidence." Charles smiled. "Exactly." Then he delivered another lesson. "The best acquisitions happen when value and vulnerability exist simultaneously." The statement lingered. Value and vulnerability. Bennett Technologies clearly possessed both. The company wasn't broken. It was mismanaged. And there was a difference. A huge difference. Charles returned to his chair. "So, let's discuss reality." Ethan nodded. "Reality sounds useful." The billionaire laughed. "You're nowhere near large enough to buy Bennett Technologies yourself." "Agreed. But that's irrelevant." Ethan frowned. "How is that irrelevant?" "Because acquisitions like this require partnerships." The answer sounded obvious, yet hearing it aloud changed everything. Partnerships. Investor groups. Private capital. Shared ownership. The acquisition didn't require one billionaire. It required a coalition united by a common vision. For the first time, Ethan could actually see the path. Not the entire path, but enough of it. Enough to believe it existed. Over the next several weeks, Charles introduced him to people. Important people. Powerful people. People whose names rarely appeared in newspapers because they preferred operating behind the scenes. Investment managers. Private equity executives. Family office representatives. Corporate acquisition specialists. The meetings felt surreal. A year ago, Ethan wouldn't have known how to start conversations with people like this. Now he sat across conference tables discussing strategy, growth, opportunity, risk. The transformation amazed even him. Not because he had become someone different. Because he had finally become himself. The person he was always capable of becoming. One particular meeting stood out. The gathering included 6 investors inside a private conference room. The discussion centered entirely around Bennett Technologies, market position, asset valuation, leadership challenges, growth potential. The conversation fascinated Ethan. Most participants viewed the company strictly as a financial opportunity, a set of numbers, a collection of assets, a potential return. Ethan saw something different. He saw a business, a real business. Employees, customers, systems, operations, potential. At one point, an investor asked a direct question. "What would you do differently?" The room turned toward Ethan. He paused, then answered honestly. "Almost everything." The investors laughed. Ethan didn't. "I mean it." The room became quiet. So he continued. He described distribution inefficiencies, operational weaknesses, leadership failures, missed opportunities, untapped potential. For nearly 20 minutes, he outlined a vision, not just for fixing Bennett Technologies, for transforming it. When he finished, nobody spoke immediately. Several investors exchanged glances. One finally smiled. "You've thought about this?" Ethan laughed. "For over a year." That answer earned several nods. Respectful nods. The kind that mattered. After the meeting, one investor pulled Charles aside. The billionaire later shared the conversation. "He likes you." Ethan rolled his eyes. "That's wonderfully vague." Charles laughed. "He thinks you're the first person he's met who actually understands the company." That compliment meant more than Ethan expected. Because it wasn't based on charisma, or networking, or politics. It was based on knowledge. Real knowledge. Months of studying, learning, observing. The kind of understanding that couldn't be faked. Meanwhile, inside Bennett Technologies, conditions continued deteriorating. Sophia witnessed it daily. Board meetings grew increasingly tense. Executives seemed defensive. Departments operated under constant pressure. And rumors spread faster than ever. Acquisition discussions had become impossible to hide. Everyone knew something major was coming. Nobody knew exactly what. One evening, Sophia attended a leadership briefing. Several senior executives sat around a large conference table. The CEO looked exhausted, more exhausted than she had ever seen him. That alone worried her. The presentation focused on strategic alternatives, cost restructuring, potential partnerships, future options. Then one slide appeared. A list of interested investment groups. The names were partially redacted. Yet Sophia immediately recognized several major players, serious players, the kind capable of purchasing entire corporations. Her pulse quickened. The process was further along than she realized. Much further. After the meeting ended, she returned home deep in thought. Ethan was already there, reviewing reports. Again, some things never changed. Sophia smiled. "You look busy." Ethan looked up. "Maybe." She sat beside him, then studied the documents spread across the table. Financial models, valuation estimates, acquisition structures. Her eyes widened. "You're actually doing this?" It wasn't a question. Ethan smiled. "I think I am." The realization felt strange, because she remembered the man from the gala. The warehouse supervisor everyone ignored. The man Ryan publicly mocked. Now that same man was sitting at a table discussing acquisition financing. The contrast was almost unbelievable. Sophia shook her head. "If someone told me this was going to happen a year ago, you wouldn't believe them." Not for a second. They laughed together. Then the laughter faded, because reality remained complicated. Acquisitions required money. A lot of money, and despite all the progress, enormous obstacles remained. The following month became a whirlwind. More meetings, more investors, more negotiations. The coalition slowly began forming. One investor committed, then another, then another. Not formal commitments, not yet, but interest, serious interest. Enough to continue moving forward, enough to create momentum. Charles called it building a war chest. The resources required for battle, the capital required for opportunity, the foundation required for acquisition, and day by day the war chest grew. One evening, after another long meeting, Ethan and Charles stood overlooking the city skyline. The sun was setting. Orange light reflected across the glass towers. The moment felt significant. Charles broke the silence. "You know what's interesting?" "What?" The billionaire smiled. "A year ago, Ryan Hayes thought he was humiliating you." Ethan laughed softly. "Yeah." Charles looked toward the horizon. "In reality, he may have created his greatest competitor." The statement lingered, because it felt true. Without the humiliation, none of this would have happened. Without the challenge, Ethan never would have changed. Without Ryan's arrogance, Ethan might still be managing a warehouse. The irony was almost poetic. Far across the city, inside a luxury office, Ryan Hayes remained focused on protecting his position. He knew acquisition discussions were happening. He knew investors were circling. He knew his future was uncertain. What he didn't know was far more important. He didn't know Ethan Carter was assembling investors. He didn't know a coalition was forming. And he certainly didn't know that the man he once called a nobody was quietly building the financial firepower necessary to challenge for ownership of the very company Ryan desperately wanted to control. The war chest was growing. The opportunity was approaching. And for the first time, the impossible no longer seemed impossible. It simply seemed difficult. And Ethan Carter had become very good at difficult things. Ryan Hayes first heard Ethan Carter's name during a board briefing. At first, he didn't pay much attention. Why would he? The meeting focused on acquisition interest, investor activity, and strategic alternatives. Dozens of names were mentioned. Investment firms, private equity groups, consultants, advisors. Nothing unusual. Then one board member casually made a comment that changed everything. We've also received inquiries from a coalition connected to Ethan Carter. The room moved on. The conversation continued. But Ryan didn't hear another word. For a moment he thought he misunderstood. Ethan Carter, the warehouse supervisor, Sophia's boyfriend, the nobody from the gala. That Ethan Carter. Ryan sat perfectly still. His expression remained calm, professional, controlled. Years of corporate experience helped him hide surprise. Inside, however, something entirely different was happening. Disbelief, confusion, anger. The board member continued discussing potential acquisition groups. Ryan barely listened. His mind remained locked on one thought. Impossible. After the meeting ended, he immediately began asking questions. Carefully, subtly, without attracting attention. The answers disturbed him. Ethan Carter's consulting company had become successful. Very successful. Investors respected him. Business leaders trusted him. His network had expanded dramatically. Most alarming of all, several major investors appeared willing to follow him. Ryan sat alone in his office reviewing information. The deeper he looked, the worse it became. Every article, every interview, every industry mention, the same pattern appeared. Growth, success, influence, momentum. The man Ryan publicly humiliated had somehow transformed into a legitimate business figure, and now he was connected to acquisition discussions involving Bennett Technologies. Ryan couldn't accept it, wouldn't accept it, because accepting it meant acknowledging something he hated. He had underestimated Ethan. Badly. The realization bruised his ego more than he cared to admit. Ryan stood and walked toward the window. The city stretched below. Normally the view calmed him. Today it did nothing. For years he had operated under a simple assumption. People like Ethan remained ordinary. People like Ryan became powerful. That was how the world worked. At least it was supposed to. Yet reality seemed determined to challenge that belief. Ryan's phone buzzed. A message from a trusted executive ally. Need to talk. Important. Ryan immediately called. The conversation lasted nearly 30 minutes. By the time it ended, his mood had deteriorated even further. Apparently several board members viewed Ethan favorably. Not because of relationships. Not because of politics. Because of results. That fact bothered Ryan more than anything. Results couldn't be easily attacked. Results created credibility. Credibility created influence. And influence created power. The exact kind of power Ryan felt slipping away. Meanwhile, across the city, Ethan remained focused on building his investor coalition. The process consumed nearly every waking hour. Meetings, presentations, financial modeling, strategic planning. The workload was relentless, but progress continued. Slowly, steadily. The coalition was taking shape. Charles Whitmore remained heavily involved. Several investment groups expressed increasing interest. Additional capital commitments appeared likely. The opportunity was becoming real. Very real. One afternoon Ethan received an unexpected warning. The call came from Charles. His tone sounded unusually serious. Be careful. Ethan frowned. About what? Charles didn't answer immediately. That alone was concerning. Finally, he spoke. Ryan Hayes knows about you. The room fell silent. Ethan leaned back. I assumed that would happen eventually. Perhaps. Charles paused. But I don't think you understand. What? The billionaire sighed. I've dealt with people like Ryan before. That wasn't reassuring. Not even slightly. Charles continued. Ambitious people are dangerous when they're winning. They become far more dangerous when they're losing. The warning lingered long after the call ended, because deep down Ethan knew Charles was right. Ryan wasn't simply facing professional challenges. He was facing an identity crisis. For years his confidence came from status, position, influence, success. Now all of those things felt threatened. And threatened people often acted irrationally. The first attack arrived 2 weeks later. An industry blog published an article questioning Ethan's consulting success. The accusations were subtle, carefully written, difficult to challenge directly. The article suggested his achievements might be exaggerated. His growth might be unsustainable. His reputation might be inflated. Nothing overtly defamatory. Just enough doubt to create questions. Ethan recognized the tactic immediately. Someone wanted to damage credibility. Not destroy it, just weaken it. The article spread quickly. Industry forums discussed it. Business publications referenced it. Questions emerged. Most people dismissed the claims. Still, the damage wasn't entirely insignificant. Sophia discovered the article during lunch. Her reaction was immediate. Anger. Pure anger. Because she recognized the strategy too. The timing felt far too convenient. Far too deliberate. That evening she arrived home carrying a printed copy. Ethan barely glanced at it. You've seen it. Unfortunately. Sophia dropped the article onto the table. This isn't random. I know. You know who's behind it. Ethan smiled slightly. We don't have proof. Sophia crossed her arms. That's not a no. The truth was obvious. Neither needed proof. Neither needed confirmation. Ryan Hayes practically left fingerprints on the strategy. The approach matched his personality perfectly. Indirect attacks. Plausible deniability. Professional sabotage disguised as concern. Classic Ryan. Unfortunately for him, the attack achieved something unexpected. Investors rallied around Ethan, not away from him. Several called personally, offering support, expressing confidence, reaffirming commitments. Years of successful results mattered more than one suspicious article. The attack failed. Ryan didn't stop. Additional articles appeared. Anonymous rumors circulated. Questions emerged about Ethan's qualifications, his experience, his ambitions. The campaign remained subtle, never direct enough to trigger legal consequences, yet persistent enough to become annoying. Very annoying. One evening Charles reviewed the situation during a private dinner. The billionaire seemed almost amused. His panicking. Ethan frowned. You sound pleased. I am. Charles smiled. Because panic creates mistakes. That answer intrigued him. What kind of mistakes? Charles sipped his drink. The expense of his grinned. The billionaire leaned forward. Ryan's biggest strength was always patience. He waited. He planned. He controlled timing. Charles shrugged. Now he's reacting. And reaction is rarely strategic. The observation proved accurate. Over the following weeks, Ryan became increasingly reckless. Several executive decisions backfired. Relationships with board members deteriorated. Internal conflicts intensified. Pressure continued building. Instead of solving problems, Ryan spent more energy protecting himself. That shift did not go unnoticed, especially by Sophia. She witnessed the change firsthand. Meetings became more emotional. Discussions became more defensive. Ryan seemed increasingly obsessed with threats. Real threats. Imagined threats. Any threat. The behavior worried several executives, including people who once supported him. One afternoon, Sophia overheard a conversation between two board members. The discussion lasted less than 2 minutes. Yet it revealed everything. He's distracted. Agreed. That's dangerous. The comments referred to Ryan. There was no doubt. His reputation was changing, rapidly, and not for the better. Meanwhile, Ethan's coalition continued growing stronger. New investors joined. Additional capital became available. Strategic planning accelerated. For the first time, acquisition participation looked genuinely achievable. Not guaranteed, but achievable. The distinction mattered. A lot. One night, Ethan stood alone on the balcony overlooking Chicago. The skyline glittered beneath the darkness. Traffic moved endlessly below. His phone buzzed. A message from Charles. Simple. Direct. Exactly the way the billionaire communicated. Ryan just made another mistake. Call me tomorrow. Ethan stared at the screen. Then smiled. Because Charles was usually right about these things. Very right. And if Ryan Hayes was making mistakes, that meant pressure was working. The campaign against Ethan had failed. The sabotage had failed. The intimidation had failed. Instead of slowing him down, the attacks had exposed something important. Desperation. And desperation was rarely a sign of strength. Far across the city, Ryan sat alone inside his executive office. The lights were off, the building nearly empty. Only the skyline illuminated the room. For the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar. Fear, not fear of losing money. Not fear of losing status. Fear of losing control. Because no matter what he did, no matter how hard he pushed, no matter how aggressively he fought, Ethan Carter kept moving forward. And deep down, Ryan was beginning to suspect a terrifying possibility. The nobody he mocked at the gala might actually become the man who took everything from him. By the time autumn arrived, Sophia Bennett had stopped asking herself whether something was wrong inside Bennett Technologies. That question had already been answered. Something was wrong. The only remaining question was how deep the problem went, and the deeper she investigated, the more disturbing the answer became. For months she had quietly collected information. Financial reports, internal presentations, budget revisions, performance summaries. At first the evidence appeared scattered, disconnected, difficult to interpret, but patterns have a way of revealing themselves over time. Especially when someone is patient enough to look. Sophia had become very patient, very determined, and increasingly concerned. One Wednesday evening she remained in the office long after sunset. Most employees had already gone home. The executive floor felt eerily quiet. Only the distant hum of air conditioning broke the silence. A stack of documents sat on her desk. Reports gathered over months. Documents she had reviewed dozens of times. Tonight she approached them differently. Instead of looking at individual projects, she looked at the timeline. Year by year. Quarter by quarter. Decision by decision. The result shocked her, because suddenly everything connected. Every questionable projection, every delayed loss, every inflated forecast, every unrealistic assumption, the same names appeared repeatedly, the same approvals, the same signatures, again, and again, and again. Ryan Hayes, his division, his leadership team, his strategic initiatives. Sophia stared at the documents. A cold feeling settled into her chest. This wasn't random. It wasn't isolated. It wasn't accidental. The pattern was systematic. For years, underperforming projects had been presented as successes. Losses had been delayed. Risks had been minimized. Board members had received incomplete information, not completely false information. That would have been easier to detect. Instead, reality had been carefully reshaped, massaged, reframed, manipulated, just enough to influence decisions, just enough to protect reputations, just enough to avoid scrutiny. Until now, Sophia leaned back in her chair. The city lights reflected across the glass windows. Somewhere below, traffic moved through the streets. People lived their lives completely unaware of the corporate storm brewing above them. Her phone buzzed. A message from Ethan. Working late again. Sophia smiled despite everything. Always. His response arrived immediately. Bring food. That earned a laugh. A small one, but a genuine one. For a moment the stress faded, then her eyes returned to the documents. And reality returned with them. The following morning she made a decision. She needed help. Not public help. Not legal help. Not yet. She needed someone she trusted. Someone intelligent. Someone discreet. Fortunately, one person fit all three categories. A senior financial analyst named Daniel Mercer. Daniel had worked at Bennett Technologies for nearly 15 years. Brilliant, meticulous, and perhaps most importantly honest. Sophia invited him to a private meeting. The moment he entered her office, he sensed something unusual. "You look worried." Sophia didn't waste time. She handed him several reports. "Tell me what you see." Daniel reviewed the documents carefully. 5 minutes passed, then 10. His expression gradually changed. Confusion, concern, disbelief. Finally, he looked up. "Where did you get these?" That wasn't the reaction she hoped for. Or maybe it was. "Why?" Daniel lowered the papers. "Because if these reports are accurate." He stopped. Sophia waited. "Daniel." He took a deep breath. "These numbers don't match." Her pulse quickened. "Explain." Daniel pointed toward several financial summaries. "These project forecasts. They assume performance levels that never happened." He flipped through more pages. "These losses. They were delayed. Intentionally." Another page. Another discrepancy. Another problem. With every explanation, Sophia felt her concerns transforming into certainty. The evidence wasn't imagined. It wasn't misunderstanding. It was real. Daniel eventually sat back. His face looked pale. "How long have you been investigating this?" "Months." The analyst shook his head. "Then you've probably only seen part of it." Those words sent a chill through the room. Only part of it. If Daniel was right, the situation might be even worse. Far worse. Over the next 2 weeks, they worked together quietly. Very quietly. Every document was reviewed. Every project analyzed. Every major decision examined. The results were devastating. The evidence revealed years of questionable behavior. Projects approved using unrealistic projections. Losses hidden behind accounting classifications. Risk assessments intentionally softened. Board presentations designed to create misleading impressions. Nothing individually catastrophic. Collectively disastrous. The cumulative impact reached hundreds of millions of dollars. Perhaps more. Sophia struggled to process the scale. For years, leadership decisions had been influenced by distorted information. Not entirely false. Just distorted enough. Enough to create bad choices. Enough to create bad investments. Enough to slowly weaken the company from within. The realization felt overwhelming. Because Bennett Technologies hadn't been destroyed by competition, or technology, or market conditions. It had been damaged by leadership, by ego, by ambition, by people prioritizing personal success over corporate health. And Ryan Hayes stood at the center of it. One Friday afternoon, Daniel closed the final report and sighed. "We have enough." Sophia looked up. "Enough. To prove it." The room fell silent. Because those words changed everything. Enough to prove it. Not suspicion. Not theory. Proof. Real proof. Recommended proof. Verified proof. The kind that could survive scrutiny. Board scrutiny. Investor scrutiny. Legal scrutiny. Any scrutiny. Sophia stared at the evidence spread across the table. Months of investigation. Thousands of pages. Countless hours. All leading here. To this moment. To the truth. That evening she carried a secure folder home. The weight felt far heavier than paper should. Ethan immediately noticed. "That's the look." Sophia frowned. "What look?" "The one you get when something important happened." She sat beside him, then opened the folder. For nearly an hour she explained everything. The reports. The pavidens. The evidence. The conclusions. Ethan listened carefully. When she finished, neither spoke immediately. The implications were enormous. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "So what happens now?" Sophia stared at the folder. "I don't know." And that was the truth. For months, the mission had been simple. Find the truth. Now she had it. The next step felt far more complicated, because truth creates consequences, sometimes enormous consequences. The following week brought another surprise, an unexpected call from a board member, one of the independent directors, someone known for integrity, someone known for discretion. The meeting request seemed innocent, routine, professional, yet Sophia sensed something, a feeling, an intuition, the same intuition that guided her investigation. The meeting took place in a private conference room. The director arrived alone, no assistants, no legal advisors, no executives, just the two of them. After a brief conversation, the director asked a simple question. Do you trust the information reaching the board? Sophia felt her pulse quicken. The question wasn't random, not even close. She answered carefully. Why do you ask? The director studied her, then sighed. Because several of us have concerns. There it was. The board was starting to notice. Maybe not everything, but enough. Enough to ask questions. Enough to become suspicious. Enough to create opportunity. The conversation lasted another hour. When it ended, Sophia left with one overwhelming realization. She wasn't alone anymore. Others were beginning to see the cracks. Others were beginning to ask questions. Others were beginning to seek answers. The truth was moving, spreading, escaping containment. And once truth begins moving, it becomes difficult to stop. Very difficult. That night, Ethan sat alone in his office reviewing acquisition documents. Investor commitments continued growing. The coalition was stronger than ever. Momentum remained on their side. His phone rang. Charles Whitmore. Ethan answered immediately. What's happening? The billionaire sounded unusually pleased. The board is starting to turn. Ethan sat upright. What do you mean? Charles laughed softly. The evidence. It's reaching the right people. The room fell silent, because both understood what that meant. If the board lost confidence in current leadership, everything would change. Acquisition discussions would accelerate. Power structures would shift. New opportunities would emerge. Charles continued. The timing couldn't be better. Ethan looked through the office window toward the distant skyline. Far beyond the darkness stood Bennett Technologies, a company built over decades, a company weakened over years, a company approaching a crossroads. For the first time, he could almost see the future forming. Not clearly, not completely, but enough. Enough to know something major was coming. The evidence existed. The board was paying attention. Investors were circling, and Ryan Hayes remained unaware of the full danger surrounding him. He knew questions were being asked. He knew pressure was increasing. What he didn't know was far worse. The proof already existed. The case was already being built, and the foundation beneath his career was beginning to collapse. One document at a time, the emergency board meeting was scheduled for a Monday morning. No public announcement, no press release, no explanation. Just a confidential notice sent to senior leadership and board members. Mandatory attendance. The wording alone was enough to trigger speculation throughout Bennett Technologies. Something significant was happening. Very significant. Employees whispered in hallways. Executives exchanged nervous glances. Rumors spread faster than facts. Some believed a major acquisition offer had arrived. Others suspected leadership changes. A few feared mass layoffs. The truth was far more dramatic. By 7 o'clock that morning, the executive floor felt unusually tense. Board members arrived early. Legal advisors appeared. Outside consultants entered through private entrances. The atmosphere resembled a courtroom more than a corporate headquarters. Sophia Bennett sat quietly inside her office reviewing notes. Months of investigation had led to this moment. Months of late nights. Months of difficult decisions. Months of gathering evidence. Now everything would finally be tested. The truth would either survive scrutiny, or it wouldn't. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Daniel Mercer entered. He looked almost as nervous as she felt. Ready? Sophia laughed softly. Not even close. Daniel nodded. Same. Oh, for a moment neither spoke. Because they both understood the stakes. The evidence wasn't simply about numbers, or reports, or forecasts. It was about accountability. And accountability rarely arrived without resistance. Especially when powerful people were involved. Across the building, Ryan Hayes adjusted his tie while staring into a mirror. His confidence appeared flawless. His expression calm, professional, controlled. Exactly the image he wanted everyone to see. Inside, however, the situation was different, far different. The previous few weeks had been difficult. Board scrutiny increased, questions multiplied, relationships weakened. Still, Ryan believed he could survive. He always survived. For years he had outmaneuvered competitors, controlled narratives, managed perceptions. This situation would be no different. At least that's what he told himself. His phone buzzed. A message from one of his remaining allies. Board looks divided. Be careful. Ryan deleted the message immediately. Then smiled. Divided boards created opportunities. If board members disagreed, consensus became difficult. And difficulty created leverage. Leverage Ryan intended to use. At precisely 9 o'clock, the meeting began. The boardroom occupied the top floor of headquarters. Massive windows overlooked the city skyline. A long polished table dominated the room. Power, influence, money, decisions worth billions had been made inside those walls. Today would be no exception. The room gradually filled. Board members, senior executives, legal counsel, financial advisors, observers. Every seat eventually became occupied. The CEO called the meeting to order. The atmosphere felt heavy, almost suffocating. Nobody smiled. Nobody made small talk. Everyone understood the importance of the moment. The CEO stood. For months, concerns have been raised regarding strategic performance, financial reporting, and leadership decisions. His voice remained calm, measured, professional. Yet the room seemed to grow quieter with every word. The CEO continued. Today those concerns will be addressed. A large screen illuminated behind him. Presentations loaded. Documents appeared. Evidence. Real evidence. Ryan remained motionless, though his jaw tightened slightly. Sophia noticed. So did several board members. The first presentation focused on company performance. Missed opportunities. Operational inefficiencies. Strategic failures. None of it looked good. Investors had already seen portions of this information. Still, seeing everything together felt devastating. Years of questionable decisions suddenly appeared impossible to ignore. Then the second presentation began. The room changed immediately, because this presentation wasn't about mistakes. It was about responsibility. Daniel Mercer stepped forward. Several board members already knew what was coming. Most executives did not. The analyst calmly began presenting evidence, quarter by quarter, project by project, decision by decision. Every conclusion supported by documentation, every claim supported by records. The evidence spoke for itself. Nobody needed dramatic accusations. The numbers delivered the message clearly enough. Revenue forecasts manipulated. Risk assessments softened. Losses delayed. Performance inflated. Not through outright fraud, through strategic distortion. The kind designed to influence decisions. The kind designed to protect reputations. The kind designed to avoid accountability. Silence filled the room. A deep, uncomfortable silence. Board members reviewed documents. Legal advisors took notes. Executives exchanged uneasy glances. And with every slide, the situation became worse. Much worse. Ryan finally spoke. I object. Every head turned. The room had been expecting this. Ryan stood slowly. His expression remained composed, but anger simmered beneath the surface. These conclusions are speculative. Daniel remained calm. The evidence is documented. Ryan shook his head. The evidence is interpreted. Several board members exchanged glances. A legal advisor requested clarification. Ryan immediately seized the opportunity. For nearly 20 minutes he challenged assumptions, questioned methodology, Attacked conclusions. The performance was impressive. Very impressive. A year earlier it might have worked. Perhaps even 6 months earlier. Unfortunately for Ryan, the evidence had become overwhelming. Every challenge received an answer. Every criticism received documentation. Every objection received proof. Piece by piece, his defense weakened. The turning point arrived unexpectedly. One independent board member spoke, a woman known for avoiding confrontation. A woman respected throughout the industry. She rarely interrupted meetings. When she did, people listened. Mr. Hayes. The room became still. Ryan turned toward her. Yes. The director removed her glasses, then asked a simple question. Did you know these projections were inaccurate? The question landed like a hammer. No legal language. No corporate phrasing. Just a direct question. Ryan hesitated. Only briefly. But everyone noticed. The director continued. Yes or no? The hesitation became longer. Dangerously longer. And in that moment, the room changed. Because confidence disappeared. Not entirely. Just enough. Enough for people to notice. Enough for people to doubt. Enough for people to begin reaching conclusions. Ryan eventually answered. I relied on information provided by my teams. The director nodded slowly, then looked away. The answer clearly wasn't helping. By lunchtime, the situation had deteriorated dramatically. Several board members openly criticized leadership decisions. Others questioned previous approvals. Legal advisors requested additional reviews. Independent auditors recommended further investigation. Momentum had shifted. Completely shifted. Ryan could feel it. For years he controlled rooms like this. Today the room controlled him. The realization felt unbearable. Meanwhile, several floors below, acquisition discussions continued quietly. Investor groups monitored developments closely. Very closely. Because uncertainty creates opportunity. And Bennett Technologies had become increasingly uncertain. One particular investor coalition attracted significant attention. The coalition led by Charles Whitmore, and increasingly associated with Ethan Carter. The same Ethan Carter Ryan humiliated at the gala. The irony would have been amusing if the situation weren't so serious. Late that afternoon, the board recessed temporarily. Executives scattered across the building. Conversations erupted everywhere. Speculation intensified. Nobody knew the final outcome. Yet everyone sensed something important had changed. Sophia stood near a conference room window overlooking the city. Daniel joined her. For several moments, neither spoke. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. I think it's over. Sophia stared at the skyline. Maybe. Nubu. Daniel shook his head. It's over. Deep down, she knew he was right. Not because Ryan had officially lost. Because the illusion had collapsed. The image. The reputation. The confidence. The narrative. All gone. Truth had a way of doing that. One revelation at a time. As evening approached, the board reconvened. Final discussions began. Decisions loomed. Recommendations were prepared. Actions were debated. The future of Bennett Technologies hung in the balance. The future of Ryan Hayes hung in the balance. And perhaps most importantly, the future ownership of the company hung in the balance. Because by the end of the day, one thing had become crystal clear. Current leadership would not survive unchanged. Too much evidence existed. Too many questions remained unanswered. Too much trust had been lost. The company needed a new direction. The only question was who would provide it. Far across the city, Ethan sat inside a conference room with Charles Whitmore and several investors. They were reviewing acquisition strategies. Preparing, waiting, watching. Because they understood something most people did not. The boardroom battle wasn't the end, it was the beginning. And as news slowly filtered out of headquarters, Charles smiled. A small smile, the kind he rarely showed. Ethan noticed immediately. What happened? The billionaire looked toward the city skyline, then answered quietly. The door just opened. And for the first time, Ethan Carter truly believed he might walk through it. 3 weeks after the boardroom battle, Bennett Technologies stood at a crossroads. The company remained operational. Employees continued working. Customers continued buying. Departments continued functioning. From the outside, everything looked normal. Inside, nothing was normal. Absolutely nothing. The investigation had triggered a chain reaction. Board members demanded accountability. Investors demanded answers. Auditors demanded access. Leadership meetings became daily occurrences. Every major decision faced scrutiny. Every strategic initiative faced review. And at the center of the storm stood Ryan Hayes. The once untouchable executive now spent most of his time defending himself. His influence had diminished dramatically. Several allies distanced themselves. Others disappeared entirely. Years of carefully cultivated relationships began unraveling. Ryan hated every second of it. Because for the first time in his career, reputation wasn't enough. Results mattered. Evidence mattered. Trust mattered. And all three were slipping away. Meanwhile, acquisition discussions accelerated. What once seemed like a distant possibility had become the board's primary focus. Investment groups submitted proposals. Private equity firms conducted due diligence. Corporate buyers expressed interest. The process moved quickly, much quicker than most employees realized. Sophia witnessed it firsthand. Every week brought new meetings, new presentations, negotiations. The board wasn't merely exploring options anymore. They were choosing a future. The question wasn't whether Bennett Technologies would be acquired. The question was by whom. One Friday morning, Sophia received confidential notice of the final acquisition review meeting. Attendance required. Board members, senior executives, key stakeholders. Decision day. The words alone made her heart race. Months of uncertainty were finally ending. Someone would walk away with control of the company. Someone would shape everything that happened next. That evening she shared the news with Ethan. For a moment he simply stared at her. Then laughed softly. "It's happening." Sophia nodded. "It's happening." Neither spoke afterward. Because both understood the significance. The opportunity Ethan once considered impossible now stood directly in front of him. Not guaranteed. Not secured. But real. Very real. The days leading to the final decision felt endless. Investor meetings intensified. Financial models were revised repeatedly. Legal teams worked around the clock. The coalition led by Charles Whitmore remained active throughout the process. Quiet, disciplined, strategic, exactly the way Charles preferred. Ethan participated in every major discussion, every presentation, every negotiation. The responsibility felt enormous. Because this wasn't simply about acquiring a company. It was about acquiring a future. Thousands of employees, hundreds of clients, decades of history. The stakes were massive. One evening, just days before the final vote, Ethan and Charles sat alone inside a conference room. The city skyline shimmered beyond the glass. Neither spoke immediately. Finally, Charles broke the silence. Nervous. Ethan laughed. "Is that a serious question?" The billionaire smiled. "Good. What? Nervous people care." The answer lingered. Charles continued. "The day you stop feeling pressure is the day you stop growing." Ethan looked toward the skyline. A year ago he had worried about paying bills. Now he worried about acquiring a corporation. Life was strange. Very strange. Charles stood, then walked toward the window. "You've already won." Ethan frowned. "What?" The billionaire turned. "You just don't realize it yet." That answer made no sense. At least not immediately. The meaning wouldn't become clear until later. Much later. Monday finally arrived. Decision day. The atmosphere inside Bennett Technologies felt electric. Employees sensed something important was happening. Nobody knew exactly what. But everyone understood change was coming. Executives arrived early. Board members gathered before sunrise. Security increased throughout the building. The boardroom once again became the center of attention. Sophia entered shortly before 9. The room was already crowded. Board members reviewed documents. Legal teams prepared final paperwork. Financial advisors organized presentations. Everyone appeared focused, serious, determined. Ryan Hayes sat near the far end of the table. His expression remained confident, at least externally. Sophia recognized the performance. She had known Ryan long enough to see through it. He was scared, very scared, because his future depended on decisions he could no longer control. The meeting began precisely at 9. The CEO opened proceedings. Final acquisition reviews commenced. Each investor group received time to present financial terms, strategic vision, operational plans, long-term goals. Hours passed. One presentation followed another. Some were impressive, others less so. Several focused entirely on cost reductions. A few emphasized restructuring. Most viewed Bennett Technologies as a collection of assets, a balance sheet, a financial opportunity. Sophia found those presentations uninspiring because the company was more than numbers. Far more. Shortly after lunch, the final investor group prepared to present. The room shifted noticeably. Board members straightened. Executives paid closer attention. Even Ryan appeared curious. The lead representative entered first, Charles Whitmore. Several people immediately recognized him. Whispers spread around the room. The billionaire's presence alone carried weight. Serious weight. Charles took his seat calmly. Then another person entered, and the room froze. Completely froze. Sophia's breath caught. Board members stared. Executives blinked. Several people actually looked confused. Ryan's face drained of color, because the person entering behind Charles Whitmore was Ethan Carter. The same Ethan Carter. The warehouse supervisor. The consultant. The man Ryan publicly humiliated. For several seconds, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The silence felt surreal. Ethan walked confidently toward the presentation table. Not as an employee. Not as an observer. Not as a guest. As a lead investor. As an acquisition partner. As a buyer. The transformation was almost impossible to comprehend. Ryan stared in disbelief. His expression revealed pure shock. Raw. Unfiltered. The kind of shock no amount of professionalism could hide. Ethan noticed, but said nothing. There was no need. The moment spoke for itself. Charles began the presentation. Calm. Precise. Professional. The proposal focused on growth. Operational improvement. Long-term value creation. Employee retention. Strategic expansion. Unlike several competing offers, this proposal wasn't built around dismantling the company. It was built around improving it. That distinction mattered. A lot. Then Ethan spoke. The room listened carefully, very carefully, because everyone wanted to hear what he would say. Especially Ryan. Ethan discussed operations, distribution, leadership, culture, opportunity. For nearly 30 minutes, he outlined a vision for Bennett Technologies. Not a financial vision, a business vision. The difference was obvious and powerful. Board members asked questions. Ethan answered confidently. Executives raised concerns. He addressed them directly. The discussion felt less like a sales pitch and more like a leadership presentation. Sophia watched from across the room. Pride filled her chest, because she remembered the man from the gala. The man standing alone while people laughed. The man everyone underestimated. The man Ryan called a nobody. Now that same man commanded the attention of one of the most powerful rooms in the city. The contrast felt unbelievable. Yet it was real. Very real. Several hours later, presentations concluded. Board members recessed for final deliberations. The waiting felt endless. Tension filled every hallway, every conference room, every conversation. Nobody knew the outcome. Not even Ethan. Not even Charles. The decision belonged entirely to the board. At 6:30 that evening, everyone was called back into the boardroom. The room became silent. The CEO stood. A single envelope rested in his hand. The atmosphere felt almost unbearable. Years of work. Months of negotiations. Everything had led here. The CEO opened the envelope. Then looked around the room. The board has reached its decision. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The acquisition proposal receiving approval is. The pause seemed to last forever. Then came the words, the Whitmore, Carter Investment Group. The room erupted. Some applauded. Others gasped. Several executives exchanged stunned looks. Sophia felt tears forming. Ryan simply stared, motionless, speechless, broken. Because the impossible had happened. The nobody had won. The warehouse supervisor had purchased the company. The man Ryan mocked had become one of its owners. The man everyone underestimated now controlled its future. Ethan remained seated. Calm, composed, professional. Yet inside, emotions collided. Relief, gratitude, disbelief, victory, everything at once. Charles leaned toward him, then smiled. A rare smile. You understand now? Ethan looked at him. Understand what? The billionaire nodded toward the room, toward the company, toward the future. Then quietly repeated words he spoke weeks earlier. You already won. Finally, Ethan understood. Because the real victory wasn't purchasing Bennett Technologies. The real victory happened long before that. It happened the moment he stopped believing he was a nobody. Everything after that was simply proof. The morning after the acquisition felt strangely quiet. Not for Bennett Technologies. The company was experiencing chaos. News outlets published headlines. Financial networks discussed the acquisition. Industry analysts rushed to release opinions. Employees filled internal message boards with speculation. Every corner of the organization buzzed with conversation. But for Ethan Carter, the morning felt surprisingly calm. He stood alone on the balcony of his apartment, watching the sunrise over Chicago. The city looked exactly the same. Traffic moved below. Buildings reflected golden morning light. People hurried to work. Nothing appeared different. Yet everything had changed. The company he spent more than a year studying now belonged, in part, to him. The thought still felt surreal. His phone had already received dozens of messages. Investors, investor clients, employees, reporters, friends. Everyone wanted something. Congratulations. Comments, interviews, opinions. The attention felt overwhelming. Ethan had never cared much about publicity. He cared about results. Always had. That wasn't changing now. The balcony door opened behind him. Sophia stepped outside carrying 2 mugs of coffee. For several moments neither spoke. They simply stood together watching the sunrise. Finally Sophia smiled. So? Ethan laughed. So? You bought a company. Apparently. She shook her head. I still can't believe it. Me neither. That answer was completely honest. Because despite everything that happened, part of him still felt like the warehouse supervisor from a year ago. Still felt ordinary. Still felt like himself. Perhaps that was why success hadn't changed him. He never viewed himself as special. Just persistent. The first official leadership meeting began at 9 o'clock. The atmosphere inside headquarters felt dramatically different. Employees gathered in hallways. Conversation stopped when executives walked past. Everyone wanted answers. Everyone wanted certainty. Most importantly, everyone wanted to know what happened next. Ethan entered the building through the executive entrance. The same building he had once visited as Sophia's guest. The same building where Ryan Hayes publicly humiliated him. The memory briefly crossed his mind, then disappeared, because surprisingly, he no longer felt angry, not even a little. The emotion simply wasn't there anymore. The boardroom quickly filled. Board members, senior leaders, advisors, representatives from the acquisition group, the future leadership team. Every seat became occupied. Charles Whitmore sat near the head of the table. His presence immediately brought stability to the room. Years of experience had that effect. The billionaire opened the meeting. His message was simple, clear, direct. Today is not about what happened yesterday. The room became silent. Charles continued. It's about what happens next. That statement established the tone immediately. No celebration, no victory laps, no revenge, just work, important work, necessary work. The company required leadership, not drama. Several key decisions were announced: governance changes, operational reviews, independent audits, strategic evaluations. The board approved every recommendation. The process moved surprisingly smoothly, because most people understood reality. The company needed change. The acquisition merely accelerated it. Then Charles stood. The room fell silent again. The next item concerns executive leadership. Every eye turned toward him. Charles smiled slightly, then looked directly at Ethan. "We need a chief executive officer." Several executives exchanged glances. Most already suspected what was coming. Still, hearing it aloud felt different, more real, more significant. Charles continued. "The board unanimously supports Ethan Carter." The room erupted in applause. Not everyone applauded enthusiastically. A few remained cautious. Some remained uncertain, but most welcomed the decision. Because unlike many corporate leaders, Ethan actually understood operations. Employees respected that. Executives respected that. Investors definitely respected it. Ethan stood slowly. The applause continued. For a brief moment, he felt overwhelmed. Not by power, by responsibility. Thousands of employees depended on decisions made inside this building. Thousands of families depended on the company's success. The weight felt enormous. As the applause faded, Ethan spoke. The room listened carefully, very carefully, because first speeches matter. His speech was surprisingly short. "I don't believe in complicated promises." That immediately captured attention. Ethan continued. "We're going to tell the truth. We're going to solve problems. And we're going to build something better." The simplicity resonated. Because after months of uncertainty, simplicity felt refreshing. Authentic. Real. The meeting concluded shortly afterward. The real work began immediately. Over the following weeks, Ethan immersed himself in every aspect of the company. Every department. Every operation. Every challenge. Long days became normal. 12-hour schedules became routine. Sometimes longer. He met employees throughout the organization. Warehouse workers, engineers, managers, customer service teams, regional leaders, everyone. The conversations revealed something important. The company wasn't broken. Not fundamentally. Most employees cared deeply about their work. Most managers wanted success. Most departments performed reasonably well. The problems existed at the top. In leadership. In priorities. In culture. That realization gave Ethan hope. Real hope. Because culture could be repaired. Trust could be rebuilt. Direction could be restored. One afternoon, he visited a distribution center outside Chicago. The facility reminded him of his warehouse days. Forklifts moved through loading areas. Workers organized shipments. Supervisors coordinated schedules. The environment felt familiar, comfortable. One employee approached cautiously. A middle-aged warehouse worker. Clearly nervous. "Ethan." The man looked uncertain. "Yes." The employee hesitated, then smiled. "I heard you used to work in a warehouse." Ethan laughed. "That's true." The worker shook his head in amazement. "That's incredible." The interaction lasted less than a minute. Yet it stayed with Ethan all day. Because employees didn't need perfection. They needed someone who understood them. Someone who respected them. Someone who remembered where they came from. Meanwhile, Ryan Hayes experienced a very different reality. His office remained untouched. For now, the board had not yet finalized decisions regarding his future. Legal reviews continued. Investigations continued. Questions continued. The uncertainty was torture. Every morning he arrived hoping for clarity. Every evening he left disappointed. The waiting slowly destroyed him. Because Ryan built his identity around control. Now he controlled nothing. Not the company. Not the narrative. Not even his own future. The contrast with Ethan couldn't have been greater. One man focused on building. The other remained trapped defending the past. Several weeks later, Ethan held his first company-wide town hall meeting. Thousands of employees joined physically or remotely. The auditorium filled completely. Additional screens displayed the event throughout headquarters. The atmosphere felt cautiously optimistic. Employees wanted reassurance, guidance, direction. Ethan delivered exactly that. He spoke about transparency, accountability, opportunity, growth. Most importantly, he spoke about people. Not profits, not stock prices. People. The response exceeded expectations. Employees applauded repeatedly. Questions flowed openly. Conversations felt honest. For the first time in years, many employees sensed genuine change, not cosmetic change, real change. After the meeting ended, Sophia found Ethan standing alone backstage, exhausted, relieved, satisfied. She smiled. That went well. Ethan laughed. I hope so. It did. Sophia stepped closer, then looked around. The company felt different already. Not fixed, not perfect, but different. Healthier, lighter, more hopeful. The transformation had begun. That evening they stood together inside the CEO office overlooking the city skyline. The same office once occupied by leaders who prioritized appearances over substance. Now it belonged to Ethan. The view was spectacular, yet neither focused on it. Instead, they looked down at the employees leaving headquarters. Thousands of people, thousands of stories, thousands of futures. Sophia slipped her hand into his. Proud of you. Ethan smiled. Couldn't have done it alone. That wasn't a cliché. It was the truth. Without Sophia's support, none of this would have happened. Without her belief, he might never have taken the first risk. Without her courage, the evidence might never have surfaced. Their journey had always been shared. The company now had a future. The culture was changing. The rebuilding had begun. And for the first time in a very long time, Bennett Technologies wasn't focused on surviving. It was focused on growing. The only remaining question concerned Ryan Hayes. Because while Ethan concentrated on building the future, the consequences of Ryan's actions were finally catching up to him. And those consequences were arriving faster than anyone expected. Ryan Hayes received the call at exactly 8:17 on a Thursday morning. The message was brief, professional, emotionless. The board would like to meet with you at 10 o'clock. Mandatory attendance. No additional details. No explanation. No agenda. Ryan stared at the email for several seconds. Deep down, he already knew what it meant. The waiting was over. For nearly 2 months he had existed in limbo. Not fired, not retained, not trusted, not respected. Just waiting. Every day brought another review, another investigation, another legal consultation, another request for information. The uncertainty had been unbearable. At least now he would finally receive an answer, even if it wasn't the answer he wanted. The drive to headquarters felt unusually long. Traffic moved normally. The city looked normal. Everything seemed ordinary. Yet Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that something important was ending. Something permanent. For years, Bennett Technologies had been his entire identity. His ambition, his future, his status, his power. Without the company, who was he? The question terrified him more than he cared to admit. At 9:55, Ryan entered the executive floor. Several employees glanced in his direction, then quickly looked away. That bothered him. Not long ago, people sought his attention, his approval, his influence. Now they avoided eye contact, avoided conversation, avoided him entirely. The change felt humiliating, a small preview of what was coming. The boardroom door opened. A legal advisor greeted him. Mr. Hayes. Ryan nodded. The room felt familiar, yet completely different. Board members occupied their usual seats. Several attorneys sat nearby. The CEO remained present. So did Ethan Carter. That detail immediately irritated Ryan. Of course Ethan was there. Why wouldn't he be? The man seemed to appear everywhere now. A year ago Ethan was invisible. Today he was impossible to avoid. The irony felt almost cruel. Ryan took his seat. Nobody smiled. Nobody attempted small talk. The atmosphere felt formal. Final. The board chairman spoke first. His tone remained respectful, professional. measured. Exactly the way difficult conversations often begin. Ryan, wait, we appreciate your cooperation throughout this process. Ryan almost laughed. That opening never led anywhere good, the chairman continued. Following extensive review, the board has reached several conclusions. There it was. The moment had arrived. The conclusions. The judgment. The consequences. The chairman reviewed findings carefully. Evidence. Investigations. Internal audits. Governance concerns. Strategic failures. Everything Ryan had been fighting for months. Listening to it summarized felt surreal. As though someone were describing another person's career. Not his. Not the ambitious executive who once seemed destined for the CEO position. Not the rising corporate star. Yet somehow it was. Every mistake. Every decision. Every warning ignored. Every opportunity wasted. All of it. The chairman eventually reached the final recommendation. The one everyone already expected. Your employment with Bennett Technologies is being terminated effective immediately. The words landed softly. Yet their impact felt enormous. For a moment Ryan simply sat there, silent, motionless. The room blurred slightly, not because he was surprised, because hearing something and experiencing it are very different things. Very different. The chairman continued speaking. Severance details, transition procedures, legal obligations. Ryan barely listened. The specifics no longer mattered. The outcome had already been decided. Years of ambition ended in a single sentence. Employment terminated, just like that. The meeting concluded 20 minutes later. Board members gradually departed. Attorneys collected documents. The room emptied. Eventually only Ryan remained. Along with Ethan. The silence felt uncomfortable, heavy, unavoidable. For several moments neither spoke. Then Ryan laughed. A short, humorless laugh. I guess you win. Ethan frowned. This isn't about winning. Ryan looked up. For the first time in years, genuine exhaustion appeared on his face. No. Ethan remained calm. This is about consequences. The answer irritated Ryan, mostly because it was true. For months he had framed everything as competition. A battle. A rivalry. A contest. Yet the reality was simpler. His problems weren't caused by Ethan. They were caused by his own decisions. His own arrogance. His own choices. Ryan looked away. The realization hurt more than termination. Much more. That afternoon he returned to his office for the final time. The room looked exactly the same. Large windows. Luxury furniture. Impressive views. The symbols of success remained. Only the success itself had disappeared. He packed slowly. A few photographs. Awards. Personal belongings. Decades reduced to a handful of boxes. The experience felt strangely hollow. He expected anger, rage, bitterness. Instead, he mostly felt tired. Very tired. As he packed, memories surfaced. The early years. The promotions. The celebrations. Moments when everything seemed possible. Back then, ambition felt exciting, healthy, motivating. Somewhere along the way, something changed. Success stopped being enough. Recognition stopped being enough. There was always another position, another title, another victory, another person to outperform. The pursuit never ended. Neither did the dissatisfaction. Ryan sat heavily in his chair. For the first time in years, he forced himself to confront a difficult truth. He had never been happy. Not really. Successful. Yes. Powerful? Absolutely. Happy? No. Because everything had become a competition. Every relationship, every opportunity, every interaction, even Sophia, especially Sophia. The realization struck harder than expected, because deep down, he finally understood why she left. Not because he lacked ambition, because ambition consumed everything else. The relationship, the respect, the humanity, all sacrificed for status. And in the end, status disappeared anyway. Shortly before leaving, Ryan walked one final time through headquarters. Employees worked at desks. Meetings continued. Conversations filled hallways. Life moved forward. The company would survive without him. That realization felt humbling. For years he viewed himself as essential. indispensable. The truth proved otherwise. Organizations always continue. People always adapt. Nobody remains irreplaceable forever. As he approached the main lobby, he noticed a familiar figure, Sophia Bennett. She stood near the entrance reviewing documents. Their eyes met briefly. For a moment neither moved. Then Sophia approached. The interaction felt surreal. Years earlier they planned a future together. Now they barely recognized each other. Ryan? The conversation felt awkward immediately, yet strangely peaceful. The hostility was gone. Exhaustion had replaced it. Ryan looked at her for a moment, then sighed. You were right. Sophia frowned. About what? Everything. The admission surprised both of them. Ryan laughed softly. I spent years thinking success would solve everything. His smile faded. It didn't. Sophia remained silent. There wasn't much to say. Some lessons can only be learned personally. Ryan understood that now. Painfully. Before leaving, he glanced toward the executive elevators. The elevators leading to the CEO office. Ethan's office. The office he once believed would eventually belong to him. For years that vision motivated him. Now it simply felt empty, because somewhere along the journey, he lost sight of why he wanted it in the first place. The realization followed him into the parking garage, into his car, onto the highway, all the way home. Meanwhile, several floors above, Ethan reviewed expansion plans inside the CEO office. The company was improving. Employee morale increased. Operational performance strengthened. Investor confidence returned. The future looked promising, yet Ethan felt no satisfaction regarding Ryan's downfall. No celebration, no revenge, no triumph, only perspective. Because the lesson wasn't about Ryan losing. The lesson was about choices. One person chose growth. The other chose ego. One learned from humiliation. The other resisted accountability. Eventually, those paths produced different outcomes. That was all. Late that evening, Ethan stood alone by the office window overlooking Chicago. The city lights stretched endlessly into the darkness. His phone buzzed. A message from Charles Whitmore. Simple as always. One chapter closes. Another begins. Ethan smiled. Because Charles was right. Ryan's story at Bennett Technologies had ended. But the larger story was far from over. The company still needed rebuilding. New opportunities awaited. New challenges approached. And somewhere deep down, Ethan understood something important. The greatest victories rarely come from defeating someone else. They come from becoming someone your past self would barely recognize. And by that measure, the warehouse supervisor Ryan, once called a nobody, had already achieved far more than he ever imagined. 1 year later, the transformation was impossible to ignore. Bennett Technologies had become one of the fastest growing companies in its sector. Industry publications praised its turnaround. Investors cited it as a case study in leadership. Business schools analyzed its recovery strategy. Competitors studied its operational improvements. The company that once stood on the edge of decline had become stronger than ever. And the most remarkable part, the recovery wasn't built on miracles. It wasn't built on luck. It wasn't built on flashy announcements or dramatic corporate stunts. It was built on trust. Something Bennett Technologies had been missing for a very long time. Ethan Carter stood inside the executive conference room reviewing quarterly reports. The numbers looked exceptional. Revenue had increased significantly. Profitability had improved. Employee retention had reached record levels. Customer satisfaction continued rising. Every major indicator pointed in the right direction. Around the table sat senior leaders from across the company. Sophia among them. The meeting felt completely different from those tense gatherings a year earlier. Back then, executives spent most of their energy protecting themselves. Now they focused on solving problems, building opportunities, creating growth. The cultural shift had become one of Ethan's proudest accomplishments. The company wasn't perfect. No organization ever was. But people trusted leadership again. That changed everything. A senior executive closed her report and smiled. Best quarter in company history. Several people applauded. Others laughed. The atmosphere felt light, optimistic, healthy. Ethan glanced toward Sophia. Their eyes met briefly. A quiet smile passed between them. Neither needed words. They both remembered where this journey began. The gala, the humiliation, the doubt, the uncertainty, everything that followed. The contrast still felt unbelievable sometimes. After the meeting ended, Ethan returned to the CEO office. The same office he once viewed as an impossible dream. Now it simply felt like a workplace, a responsibility, a mission. Success had changed his circumstances. It hadn't changed who he was. That realization mattered. A lot. His assistant entered carrying a stack of correspondence. Several items need your review. Ethan nodded. The assistant placed everything on the desk. Contracts, reports, partnership proposals, letters. One envelope immediately stood out. Handwritten. No corporate branding. No company logo. Just a name. Ryan Hayes. Ethan stared at it. For several seconds he considered ignoring it. Then curiosity won. He opened the envelope. Inside rested a single handwritten letter. Short, simple, unexpected. Ethan began reading. For a long moment, the office became completely silent. The letter contained no excuses, no accusations, no bitterness, just honesty. The kind of honesty that usually arrives after difficult lessons. Ryan admitted he had underestimated him. Badly. He admitted he spent years believing titles defined value, believing status determined worth, believing success made him superior. The letter acknowledged those beliefs were wrong, painfully wrong. Most surprising of all, Ryan apologized, not for losing, not for the acquisition, not for the investigation, for the gala, for the humiliation, for treating another person as though they mattered less. The apology felt genuine. Very genuine. Ethan read the letter twice, then carefully folded it and placed it inside a drawer. The gesture surprised even him, because a year earlier he might have framed the letter, celebrated it, viewed it as validation. Now, it simply felt like closure. Nothing more, nothing less. That evening Ethan left the office early, a rare occurrence. Sophia had convinced him to take the evening off, something she increasingly considered a professional responsibility. The city glowed beneath a golden sunset. Traffic moved steadily through downtown streets. People filled restaurants and parks. Life continued, exactly as it always had. Sophia met him outside headquarters. For a moment they simply stood together looking at the building. The same building that changed both of their lives. The same building where everything began. The same building they nearly lost. Remember the gala? Sophia asked. Ethan laughed. Hard to forget. She smiled. I remember thinking that night was a disaster. It was? No. Sophia shook her head. It felt like a disaster. The distinction mattered. Because without that night, nothing else happens. No consulting company. No investors. No acquisition. No transformation. No future. Sometimes the moments that hurt most become the moments that help most. The lesson had taken a year to fully understand. They walked several blocks before reaching the river. The evening air felt comfortable, peaceful. For once, neither carried urgent responsibilities. No board meetings, no investor calls, no crisis management. Just time. Time together. Eventually they reached a rooftop restaurant overlooking the city. One of their favorite places. The skyline stretched endlessly before them. Glass towers reflected the fading sunlight. The view felt spectacular. Yet Ethan found himself paying more attention to Sophia. Because through every challenge, every setback, every victory, she remained there, supporting him, believing in him, pushing him forward when doubt appeared. The acquisition may have changed his career. Sophia changed his life. The difference was important. Dinner lasted nearly 3 hours. Conversation flowed easily. Future plans, travel ideas, company goals, personal dreams. Topics that once seemed impossible now felt achievable. Not because they had become wealthy, because they had become confident. There was a difference, a major difference. Later that evening they stood together on the rooftop terrace overlooking Chicago. The city lights illuminated the darkness, thousands upon thousands of lights, each representing another story, another challenge, another opportunity. Sophia slipped her hand into his. Happy. The question sounded simple, yet it carried enormous meaning. A year earlier Ethan might have answered differently. A year earlier success felt like a destination, a finish line, something waiting in the future. Now he understood better. Success wasn't ownership, or wealth, or titles. Success was waking up excited about the life you built, the people around you, the work you did, the future ahead. Ethan smiled. Yeah. Sophia studied him. Just yeah. He laughed, then looked across the skyline, across the city, across the journey that brought them here. I'm happy. The answer felt complete, because it was true. The money was nice. The company was nice. The success was nice. But happiness came from something else entirely. Purpose, growth, meaning, the things nobody could buy. The things Ryan spent years chasing in the wrong places. As the night deepened, Ethan found himself reflecting on everything that happened. The warehouse, the humiliation, the risk, the failures, the victories. Every chapter mattered, even the painful ones, especially the painful ones, because those chapters created the person standing here now. And perhaps that was the greatest lesson of all. The world may decide who you are today, but only you decide who you become tomorrow. Ryan Hayes called him a nobody. For a brief moment, Ethan almost believed it. Thankfully, that moment didn't last. Because nobody is just a starting point, not a destination, not an identity, just a place where some stories begin. And as the lights of Chicago stretched endlessly into the distance, Ethan Carter realized his greatest achievement wasn't buying the company. It wasn't becoming CEO. It wasn't proving Ryan wrong. His greatest achievement was proving himself wrong. The limits he believed existed, the fears he accepted, the future he settled for. All of them had been illusions. The moment he stopped believing them, everything changed. Beside him, Sophia smiled as the city glowed beneath the stars. Ahead of them stood new opportunities, new adventures, new dreams. The story that began with humiliation had ended with triumph. Not because one man fell, but because another chose to rise. And sometimes, that makes all the difference.